Things have been a little bit crazy for us. My class, we actually all got quarantined
Oh, no.
because of COVID, but I was able to teach virtually, and we tried to keep moving. But we were back at school this week. But it seems like, Dr. Lamb, every day we get an email that somebody in our building has tested positive, and so
course.
that's just a lot of that. But
Mm-hmm.
I mean, our
Yeah.
families had a virtual option this year. They could go to the virtual academy. But that was really before the Delta variant came out. So I think there are a lot of parents who probably would have taken that option had they known, what they know now. And in fact, in my class, I had parents who got their children tested because you can come back sooner if you get a negative test than if you
Right.
just quarantine.
Right.
And then their kids had it. So no symptoms, no anything, but and now I have one grandmother who lived in the home who has it, and she's in ICU. So
Yeah.
we've just really been praying for a
Yeah.
miracle for her, but it's scary.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's Blair. I was going to talk with Blair. How are things in 5th grade in North Carolina?
Yeah, it's sounding pretty much the same. This past week, like basically every class had about 5 to 6 students absent, dealing either somebody in the house having COVID or the child is sick and the parent saying, I'm trying to get them a test. So it's basically the same things going around. Our media specialist was out. She had COVID. So it is,
We
like you
don't
said, a scary
understand
time.
probably. Back to what Melody was talking about, if parents had known differently, they would have might have chosen a different option. That's because as generally as a society, we don't understand probability. We don't we don't understand number theory and probability. What we have to understand is even if you're vaccinated, there's still a 5% chance that every time that you're exposed to the virus, you have the possibility to contract it yourself. And so there is no cumulative in terms of, if I'm exposed twice a day, each time is an independent time. But if I have enough times, if I'm exposed to enough people, that I have a 5% chance eventually, regardless of my underlying conditions, if I keep giving myself the opportunity, I will eventually get it. That's the way probability works. And so the more times you come in contact with somebody who's carrying the virus, eventually one of those 5 chances out of 100 or 1 out of 20, that eventually rolls up if you give yourself enough independent chances. And so it's like a coin flip. What happened the previous time has nothing to do with the next time, but if you give yourself enough times, and if we understood how that worked, I think folks might make a different decision. But we continue to, even people who are on the vaccine side and that side of the politics don't seem to understand theory of secondary invasion. They don't understand heat, ice cream, and crime that we talked about last time. Welcome, everybody. They don't understand heat, ice cream, and crime. Bill Maher, for example, continues to propagate the notion that if you're overweight, that's the problem. No, it's the problem that caused you to be overweight. That is the heat in the heat, ice cream, and crime. It's not the overweight's like the ice cream. I don't know why he can't understand that, but we can't. His contention is if we cured the overweight problem in the country, that would cure COVID. No, it's heat, ice cream, crime. If we could cure the underlying things that cause people to be overweight, that's where the issue is. But so as long as we don't understand some basic probability and some basic number theory, we're going to be doomed to continue. And the more cases, the more variants. And so I think I told you last time, my brother-in-law fully vaccinated, Still got Delta, about killed him. Couldn't have been healthier, never been overweight in his life. But he gave himself enough independent chances, and he eventually got it. And he got it because of his age, not because of his health condition. He can't fix his age. He's 65. His natural immune system, and I don't know anybody that I've ever met in my life that's lived a healthier lifestyle than him. No smoking, no drinking, no, very little red meat. I mean, you name it. No diabetes, no nothing. I'm telling you, as healthy a person, was a professional athlete for 11 years, then a PE teacher for 30. Never been a healthier person I've ever met. In terms of what we consider to be healthy. Simply age and opportunity got him. He gave himself enough independent chances at 65 years of age that he eventually got it. And so the vaccine saved his life. If he'd been unvaccinated, it would have killed him. It nearly got him anyway. And so we have to understand, A, everybody needs to be vaccinated, and B, don't give yourself independent chances. Stay away from people, wear your mask, do the things you're supposed to do. That's the only thing that'll help you. You can't fix your underlying health condition if it's being a senior citizen. You can't fix that part. And so if we understood the function of heat, ice cream, and crime probability, Venn diagram shared, if we understood how variables work, I think we would be better off. But welcome everybody. We're just talking as people are coming in, kind of getting a rundown on how things are going at Gardner Webb. We've had multiple outbreaks. I think the 20 members of our swim team either all have it or are in quarantine. Everyone. And so things continue on. Now, I have heard this is just one of those insider information. And I'm not telling you I'm smart enough to know the link, but I understand one of our sports teams who have pretty much all who have had COVID now have a third issue is they're all now getting a second health issue beyond COVID, because they've all had COVID and now they're more susceptible to the next thing, some sort of STD that's going around among them. I can't confirm or deny that, but I have heard that from a fairly reliable source that that's now an issue. But again, if you in endocrinology, if you understand, and physiology, understand the theory of secondary invasion, that's very likely as well. That's another spinoff of this is once your immune system has been attacked by this virus, then it makes it easier for other viruses as well. Again, unfortunate.
Dr. Lamb.
Yes.
I would add to that, my experience at our school is that testing has been super unreliable. Multiples of us have tested negative, then to turn around and test positive. So, we're walking around and students are walking around not knowing that they have the virus, but they do. And so those independent chances we're giving ourselves, we don't even know we're giving ourselves.
That's exactly right. That's what I mean. That is exactly right. So let's talk about that in terms of chapter 1, where we are. Some of the concepts. We talked last time about hypothesis testing, type 1 and type 2 errors. Now, when these tests are set up for COVID, what we know is that there are 14 different, let me call them brands of tests, 14 on the market. They're from the short form and long form, but together. And some are immediate. Some take 2 days to get the results back. So those are there's 2 types, but there's 14 of them in aggregate of those. And when we talk about reliability, we know that 11 of those are they're set up in terms of the default is to show a negative rather than a positive. That if there's an error, they err on the side of the type 2 error. You know, you don't have it, but you really do. With that, and they're intentionally set up that way to show, because we don't want to tell people they've got something when they really don't. So we prefer the type 2 where we tell you you don't have it, as opposed to the type 1 where we do. And now that's set up in the test itself, under the idea that it's better to err on the side of not treating people than treating people, because that's the way evidence-based medicine has always been done. But in the case of a pandemic, things change. What we should do now is set it up exactly the other way. Since there really is no treatment at the early level of detection, we should have set our scale up the other way on the test, where we show false positives. That's a whole lot better in stopping the pandemic and limiting the number of independent chances, as to Melody's point. If you're trying to stop the number of independent chances that you get this in terms of probability, remember, probability is 5% if you've been vaccinated. That doesn't change. But the number of independent opportunities that you're exposed, that's your issue. So when we're scaling and we're working on the reliability of the test, we need to set it up where it shows false positives rather than false negatives. As we would with traditional evidence-based medicine, we've always erred on the side of do no harm. But in a pandemic, we should have understood that probability kicks in and changes independent chances, that we should have set it up the other way. We intentionally did that, not understanding how a pandemic works. Again, it's just number theory, folks. This is, you know, this is even prior to the science, is number theory, understanding independent chances, probability. And so this is kind of like everybody in the country now is like taking this class. And a lot of us aren't doing too good because we don't know enough yet. We don't understand probability and number theory. The basis of all inferential statistics is probability. Period. That'll be on the final exam for those of you who've taken notes. You saw me take the final exam last week or 2 weeks ago. That's the basis of all. You have to understand probability and how probability works. Back to heat, ice cream, and crime, variables, seeing correlations that aren't there based on anecdotal information, or ignoring those that are. And part of that is where we get our news. And so to go along with chapter 1, and even when we are trying to be scientific in our methodology, again, where we picked our samples and how we picked our samples. And so under today, again, everybody welcome. So under today, let me share my screen. I have this, and I want to start with this today. These different types of samples. And here's part of our problem is we don't understand sampling. The whole notion of a sample is to take a large population, pull out a group from that's representative of that whole group, so that we can study that sample in some way. And then from the knowledge gained from that sample, we can generalize those findings back to that larger sample. That's the whole notion of sampling. If we've only got 5 people, we won't pull a sample from them. We will gather data from all 5, but what if you've got 5,000? So we're looking for a sample that represents that larger group for the purpose of generalizing the data and the findings from that small group or sample back to that larger group or population. So random sample, everybody in the population has an equal chance of being in the sample. That's a completely random sample. A convenient sample, we talked about this last time, is that these folks were near us, they were easy to get to. Back to the notion of Gardner Webb was trying to figure out why accepted students didn't come as freshmen. So they said, we'll go ask the ones who did. We have all of them together. We've identified, we've isolated them, we have access to the 381 freshmen who did come this year. We're going to go ask them why the others didn't come. What's wrong with this picture? The 381 that came they do share the same characteristics as the ones who didn't. They applied, they got accepted, they're 18 years old, they're high school graduates. They look the same, but are they the same? No, they're not the same. That's a completely different sample. They have no notion why people didn't come. But it was a convenience sample. And it looked like they at one time had both been samples of a larger population, but they were not representative of the group who didn't come. We would have needed to pull people from that population. Cluster sampling, sometimes referred to as stratified random sampling, is we stratify by some variable and then pull from those randoms from those. Like say men and women, we separate them and then pull. We could do that. Stratified, we have homogeneous groups, and we pull multiples, more than just one. Cluster again is we just pull with 2. Stratified, we may have more than 2, and we pull them and then randomly sample from those according to what we're looking at. And then systematic, we take the larger population. We divide the population by the desired sample size. We're going to pull a third of them, so every third person we pick. That's pretty simple. And so back to the pandemic, we don't understand. We are basing most of our information on convenience samples rather than stratified samples. And the variables that put us in these groups, we picked the wrong ones. Again, we think that water is what makes the bird fly. We think that being overweight is what causes people to get COVID, when it's the underlying health condition that caused you to be overweight. I mean, people can have for example, people can have diabetes and not be overweight. So if that were the case, only overweight people could get COVID. And that we know that's not the case. And then we talk about, well, we only have to be concerned if they die. That's not true either. And so again, we don't understand enough about number theory and about sampling. We don't understand probability. Your job here is to understand and don't fall for the heat ice cream crime. Don't fall for the notion that if we solved obesity, if we just everybody lost weight, that we'd be fine on the pandemic. That's not true. The underlying issues would still be there. We call that operating on the wrong end of the horse. So understand your sample is supposed to be representative of the population so that you can generalize the findings of the sample to the larger population. That's what we're trying to do.
Dr. Lamb.
Let me pause, and now's a great time for questions.
I have a question, Dr. Lamb.
We'll go right ahead.
Yes, sir. When you were mentioning the students of Gardner Webb, does it impact the validity if you only do how does it relate to the validity of the sample and the data that you get from it if you just do it for 1 year? Can you make any conclusions if you had done this examination over a 3-year period in terms of the data that you received about why students, didn't choose to come to Gardner Webb? Or can you do it one time and that's pretty valid?
All right, so we're really talking about reliability here. Validity is the test you would use. It's, that would be the measure that you use. I mean, we could use valid, but the reliability would it be impacted if we only did it one time? Again, this is a case study, and what did we talk about last year? David's picked up on something here. That would be a case study. Remember, if we set that study up, that would be a case study. All right, what did I tell you last time is the minimum really acceptable number of years for a case study, because it's a population each year. David picked up on it. 5 years. For reliable results, remember, get the same thing, to get reliable results. Now, the questionnaire that we used to measure why they came or not, that would speak to the validity. But David is talking about reliability. How reliable are these results? We would have to use this instrument on them, this valid instrument, for 5 years before we could say with any certainty, this is why they come or this is why they don't come. Now, back to Hertzberg, two-factor theory. We can't assume either that the reasons that they come, but the opposite is the reason they don't come. They're different things. What did Hertzberg tell us in the two-factor theory? The reason people stay is different than the reason why they go. You can't assume that they're just opposites. Satisfiers and dissatisfiers. So if we ask people why they came, we can't assume that that's why they didn't come. We have to ask the people who didn't come why they didn't come. Not people who did come. That's the first problem with reliability. That's not the same sample. That's two different populations now. They started out as one population, but they stratified themselves into two by choosing to come or not to come. And so if we ask, so that they're no longer the same population. Now they're different. So we got to get the population that didn't come. And then we got to ask them not why you went where you went, but why you didn't come here. But that's a reliability issue. But again, David's exactly right. One year, one time, we would have to, a case study, 5 years. We would have to invest 5 years of time. You say, well, that's too long. So that's when what we do then is we try to outnumber the problem. What that means is we do meta-analysis. We go to 5 or 10 or 15 colleges and ask their students, why didn't you come? And that's how we shorten the time. Instead of doing a case study, we do an analysis of variance. See, again, there are shortcuts that are acceptable in statistics when you're doing this kind of research. So instead of waiting for 5 years of freshmen to ask them why you didn't come to Gardner Webb, what we would do is we would go to 5 or 10 or 15 different colleges and ask the freshmen who didn't come to those colleges, why didn't you come? We would just try to outnumber the problem. We would substitute simply numbers for time. That's perfectly acceptable. That's just one of those tricks of the trade. We just outnumber the problem. Again, we go back to probability. We use probability as our friend. We use population and sample as our friend to shorten our time. When I have doctoral students that come to me who do dissertations, first thing I tell them is do you want to get out before you're as old as me? And they say, yeah. You're the oldest person we know. We don't want to be as old as you. Well, then let's not do a case study. There are other ways that we can get the data that you want without having to wait 5 years to get it. And don't call 1 year a case study. It's not. It's probably a phenomenology. We can do a phenomenology over 1 year, but we can't do a case study, not a good one that's reliable. Again, if you understand what you're doing, that doesn't mean we can't do it. I go back to, again, I had a doctoral student who came in and did a proposal to our 2 5th grade teachers, Melanie and Blair. One of the bigger problems in elementary school is teaching math. Why would that be? And I'm going to ask our 2 teachers, what is the problem with math in elementary school? And this is anecdotal, but this is a good starting point. So our problem is in elementary school, low math scores. What might be our potential problems? Again, back to chapter 1, how do you use it in real life, and examples that come from that. Our problem is low math scores in elementary school, which is a nationwide problem. I hear all these people, these pundits all the time, lamenting the fact that our elementary kids are 17th in the world in math. All right, if we accept that premise, which is it's not true, but if we accepted that, what's our starting point then? Melody, what's the problem what's the problem with math scores in elementary school?
All right, we could talk all day about this, Dr. Lamb, but I'll just throw a couple things out. One, teachers who can do the math themselves but don't know how to explain it to children. That's a problem. 2,
that would be math concepts, right?
Right.
Got it.
2, children have less experience at home using math.
Readiness.
Right.
All right. Can we impact readiness?
Oh.
That'd be no bueno. Can't do that. All right. So, but we can impact math concepts. Now, so let's think about our population for a minute. Do a lot of people who are really good at math going into elementary school teaching? Do they do that as a general rule? That would be no. So back to Melody's problem. Even if they understand math themselves, they really don't understand math concepts well enough to teach. The people who do tend to go into other things. So they've already stratified themselves. So if we were going to try to improve math scores, what we need to do is improve the level of understanding of mathematical concepts for elementary teachers. So that would be that would be the way that we would try to address low math scores, right? Melanie's exactly right. That's exactly what you would do. So I had a doctoral student come in. She wasn't mine, but they always call me when somebody's got to deliver the bad news. So they had me sit in on her proposal. I'm the methodologist, so I come in, and so this is what she said is Kim's at Wake Forest. So in the town of, so you have Winston-Salem, Forsyth County Schools. It is the fifth largest district in the state. You've got Charlotte and Wake, which are always, and then you've got Guilford, Cumberland, and then you got Winston-Salem. So it's fourth or fifth largest district in the state. So it's significant in size. And so they had identified 1,100 elementary teachers that they wanted to do this math concepts workshop with. And so this person, she was one of the people who were going to deliver the workshop. And so what she wanted to do her dissertation on was basically the efficacy of the math workshop. Did it, how good was it? How effective was it? So, so what she proposed is that they had their content. It was valid content, best practices, math concepts. We're going to run this workshop. Everything's good now until we got to David's reliability piece. So we said, how are you going to measure? We know that your instrument, the workshop itself, you're showing us that this is valid materials that you're using. Let's talk about reliability. Okay, we're gonna deliver it this way. We're gonna do it the same. Everybody's gonna get the same this way. We're good then. All right. Then we got to the assessment piece. How we're going to assess it. And she said, I've got 5 teachers that I know. I'm going to ask them what they thought of the workshop. What do you think about that for assessment? There are 5 teachers that I know. They divide them in groups of 20. 1,100 of them. And she said, I have 5 people that I know out of 20. That's 1, 2, 3, 4. That's 20%. They said that's 20%. That's all we have to have when we're doing qualitative work when we ask them. Is that a reliable sample to gauge the effectiveness of the workshop for 1,100 teachers? Is asking 5 of them that is that a reliable way or valid or reliable way to assess the workshop itself? Yes or no, and why or why not? Go. Somebody chime in and tell me.
I think Jamiko said it, but it's convenient sampling.
All right, so it was a convenient sample. That is correct. What else is wrong with that? Just asking people
It's not random.
It's not random. That's correct.
There's bias.
There is bias. Very good, David. There's that B word that pops up, that bias. I'm gonna ask my friends. That's kind of like, when your spouse asks you, when I ask my spouse, does this soup make me look fat? And she says, no, it's all that food you ate that makes you look fat. Sometimes they're not asked. You don't want to know, don't ask. And so again, it's asking your friends. You're expecting them to tell you what you want to hear. Other issues with this methodology of assessment.
It's not representative.
It isn't at all. That's absolutely 5 out of 1,100. Too small. That's correct. Too small. What else? If we ask every teacher, all 1,100, what they thought of the workshop, and they all told us that the workshop was wonderful. That's qualitative again. Where's our quantitative piece? And what would the quantitative piece be, Jamiko? I thought about Jamaica last night. Something came up about one of the residence hall that I used to live in at NC State. We were looking at it online last night. I lived in Turlington.
Nice.
And it
I
was
think-
dumped then. I can only imagine what it is now.
Yeah, that could be a whole different thing.
Yeah, but you know, they stuck. When I originally went, I was in Bregal in a triple until they moved us out. But they, you know, athletes back then, you had to live on campus. You know, all they had was the College Inn, and that was only for upperclassmen. So they stuck you in the cheapest residence halls. When I went, this is how old I am. When I went to NC State, it cost $180 to stay in Turlington for a whole semester. That's what room was. There was no board. We didn't have cafeteria. They closed Harris Hall just when I got there.
It's closer to 4,000 now per semester.
Yeah, it was $180. That's why they stuck us in there, because it was the cheapest. Now, if you stayed in one of the nice newer dorms on West Campus, they were like $400 a semester. But since, you know, the athletic department was footing the bill, $180. And you can, even back in those days, you could imagine what you got for $180. Not very much. All right, so let's talk about numbers now. Even if if we ask all 1,100, which of course would be impossible, if we ask all 1,100 what they thought of the workshop, and they all said boffo, smash it, that's just the qualitative side. What's the quantitative side of this? What was the whole purpose? Back to Melody. What was our original problem here?
The
Low
original
math
problem
scores.
to make sure to see if this training helps them be better at teaching math. So we never asked a question about, did it help you be better at teaching math? Then you're asking.
That even if we did, and they all said yes, that's again when I work with principal candidates about teacher empowerment in their classroom, and I tell them, you can't ask them if they're good teachers, because what will all of them tell you? I'm the world's best. You've got to go look and see if they're any good or not. You know, it's kind of like when you try to determine the gender of puppies, you have to lift their tail and look. You got to, you know, you got to go look. And so the problem is in this research design and assessment is we could ask people what they thought from now on, but we have a way to determine if it actually worked or not. If it worked, what would we expect test scores in math to do for elementary kids? We'd expect them to go up. That's the quantitative piece. So there's two different things we're trying to measure here. How good a job they did, you know, were they funny, entertaining? Were they prepared in the actual session? Were their materials good? Was their teaching methodology good? That's one issue. But the bigger issue is we did not set this workshop up with these 1,100 teachers so that these people presenting it would have work to do or be able to make money as a consultant. What we wanted in the end was for our math scores to go up. Too many times we set our assessment up of the actual process and not the outcome. We have to identify our outcome variable. What are we trying to change? And we have to make sure in our methodology that we assess that change that we desire. That's one of the oldest tricks in the book, is to assess the actual workshop and not the outcome. And when I said that, we have no control over whether the scores go up or not. But then we don't need your workshop. We didn't hire you to do the workshop so you could make money. This person was a consultant, just like you are training to be, who went to this district and said, I can do this math workshop and make your test scores go up in math. But then when we assess it, oh no, we can't do that. We want to ask people how they enjoyed it or not, or if they thought it was good or that it would affect their teaching. So when we get right down to it, we, too many times as consultants, we want to try to avoid the, measuring what we really were there for. That's like somebody asking me what time it is, and I say, yeah, it's a nice watch. Yeah, it is a nice watch. This was a gift for my 60th birthday a few years back. It is the only nice watch I've ever owned. But that has nothing to do with what time it is. And that's too many times in our business, consultants set up things, and then the way we assess it is nice watch rather than what time it is. And so as I explained to this person who did these math workshops and was a consultant, we're going to have to, number one, on the qualitative side, we're going to have to ask more than 5 people, and they're going to have to be random. Now, the sample size for qualitative is not nearly as big as quantitative. We could do 5%, but that'd still be 60 teachers we would have to ask. But now on the quantitative side, remember, 35% is the minimum. We would have to go in and check the test scores but we could check the test scores of every kid in the district of the teachers who took the math concept, because all of them took it. We could simply pull their scores. We wouldn't have to have a sample of them. We just pull, since all of them had it, we'd pull the scores of all of them. So yes, we could get a random sample on the qualitative side of 60 teachers, just randomly pick 60 teachers and ask them what they thought. That'd be good technique. We would not have to pull a sample on the quantitative side. We would simply look at our aggregate math scores for the district. Did they go up or not? Because that's really what we were concerned was it in aggregate.
Dr. Lamb, would
Yes.
you, I guess, would you get deeper in terms of the sample, like, for example, and the educators know more about this than I do, but in local government. But would you try to figure out where people are from? Because I don't know if you at Charlotte Neck Way and there are more resources invested versus somewhere like a rural county. Okay.
There's a lot, David. That's getting back to 2 weeks ago. You're exactly right. There's a lot of independent variables that go into that dependent variable. And even within those test scores in Winston-Salem, Forsyth, I'd be interested to know, was there different groups inside all of the elementary kids that did better or worse because of this? I'd look at high wealth schools, low wealth schools. I'd look at gender. I'd look at race. I'd look at all the things that EBOS works out for us, because we know those are the things that factor into a kid's test score. We know that what the 10 things are. I'd look to see, did this workshop work equally well over all of those variables, or were there certain things that we could target within this training that, okay, the boys all did better after this, but the girls didn't do it all? Would that be something that would be would that be one of those, well, that's good to know, or would it, wow, that's actionable? And see, that's what you folks, that's where your expertise kicks in. We assume that you're going to be able to do all the run the numbers, but then where your expertise and experience kicks in past the super crunching level is all right. Now, here's this problem that we've identified. What are we going to do about it? We ran this math shop for 1,100 elementary teachers who were by and large about 85% female. And as a result, our test scores went up 1 point as a district. But what we found is boys went up 3 points and girls didn't go up at all. What are we going to do now? Was there something in the training of these teachers that we could have done to help them target these girls? You know, that's where, when you get to the findings, sometimes you find, I need to do further study. I need to figure, you know, this is just the first layer. there's another layer on top of this and on top of this. And that's as a consultant, that's where you earn your money. Is you did not just did you get results, but what kind of results did you get? And what could we do to tweak that? Yeah, we're happy that boys went up, but we're not happy that we spent all this money and girls didn't move. And since the only new variable that was introduced was the training worked with teachers with boys, but not with teachers with girls. What are we going to have to put into the training that specifically targets girls now? Is there something that we can do? Then it's back to the drawing board. It's back to doing our lip reviews and looking at other studies and looking at variables to figure out why we spent all this money and didn't move. But obviously the training worked in some aspect because boys moved, but girls didn't move. What could we do to fine tune the training so that we could get a rising tide for all ships, both boys and both good boys and girls? In a lot of business situations, outside of even inside schools, but especially outside schools, one of the problems that we see when we do these kinds of studies and we introduce new variables or new inputs is when we make one thing go up, sometimes we make what about other things? We tend to make them go down. That happens a lot in city county government, because in city county government, what is the resource that we add or take away? Money or people, or both? Human and fiscal. We don't do that as much in the school business. We don't take a teacher away from the classroom. But we do it to a certain extent. But in city county government, it's kind of it's winners and losers, isn't it? When one department goes up, what happens to the other department? They go down. Unless we go in and either up our property tax rate or we up the millage in terms of what, well, that's the same thing, the property tax rate and the millage, or the value of the home. And so, right just prior to the pandemic, the big deal here in Cornelius, where I am today, is our tax rate will not go up this year. And all the town commissioners sprang their shoulder, patting themselves on the back. All of them in a sling, trying to pat themselves on. Our tax rate did not go up, except they changed the evaluation of our property. So in the end, it doesn't matter whether the rate went up or my evaluation. What mattered to me in the end was how much the check was I had to write them at the end of the year. That's what really mattered. And so in that scenario, in order to get the budget that they wanted without technically raising taxes, the evaluation of my house went up in 1 year, $160,000, not $260,000, went up an additional $160,000 in 1 year in order to get the rate that they want. So again, that's one of the things that we have to understand in city county governments and other taxing authorities is when one group goes up, unless you're willing to either up the tax rate or the evaluations, if you've got a finite pot of money, the way that we win and lose in city county government and those kinds of things in universities, which are a little bit different than public schools, is when one department goes up, another one goes down. And so, yes, we can increase this, but we may decrease this at the same time. And that's one of the things you have to be concerned about as a consultant is you come in and say, if we'll throw all of our resources at this problem, we can fix it. But now we've created this problem over here. And so back to one of the places I worked, we got a new superintendent. I was a principal at the time. We got a new superintendent. And we threw all of our resources at trying to get kids, first time kids, college kids to go to college. But we had to pull all the money for remediation. And what happened to high school graduation rate? Oh man, all-time low. Got more kids going to college than ever before. But it worked. But see, the genius of that move was, let's think about numbers for a minute. This is one of my favorites. If you decrease the number of students graduating, even if you don't increase the number going to college, the percentage going to college automatically goes up. Think about it for a minute. Think about this one. This was ingenious. Now, unethical, but genius. So if we have, let's say, we'll use round numbers. If we have 100 students graduating from high school, and traditionally 40% of them, or 40, have been going to college. So that's 40% of our students. But if we decrease the number to 80 graduating, and we still have 40 going to college, we increase the number going to college from 40 to 50%. That's a 10% increase. Look at us. So what he did was he threw all of his resources into, preparing kids to go into first-time kids to go to college, and that number went up while the number graduating went down, and we had record results. Is that an ethical thing to do? Again, part of what you have to do is you can influence these numbers, folks. But unfortunately, the ethics behind what he did is he threw those kids away. He threw those kids away intentionally and claimed victory. Look at me. I told you I could make the percent going to college go up. Look at me. But you did it at the expense of kids graduating from high school. And that was intentional, because the fewer that graduate, even if I don't get even not one more kid going to college, my percentage goes up of the kids who graduate, because I've got fewer graduating and the same number going to college. Would somebody do that? Well, of course they would. If we didn't care how we got results, David, in city county government, this one department, are they happier because they got more money, or are they happier because the competing department down the hall they got their money? I can tell you they're happy about both, but I'll let David weigh in.
I'm not sure, Dr. Lambert, if this answers your question, but yeah, you're right. A lot of times, if one department gets their funding, that means someone else is not getting theirs. And that means that those services you can't provide because this is the hot ticket item right now. And there's an election coming up next year. So this right here is the #1 priority. We're not worried about that right now, but we throw a little money over it. You solve that issue, but you create another one here, no one's really looking at.
That's exactly right. We want that campaign issue. Just like that superintendent, he wanted that one thing that he could hang his hat on. Look at me, look at me, look at me. I did this, but what about this over here? What did you have to do? Basically, what he did was he lit the backside of his house on fire to keep the front side warm. Eventually, the fire consumes the whole house, though. But we ain't worried about that. We expect to be in the next job by then. Yeah. And that's what you do. And that's one of the things that as an ethical consultant, you have to be concerned with. You cannot do things like that. Or as the leader of an organization. Your #1 job as a leader of the organization is to keep the organization alive. not just alive while you're there till you can get a better job. But many times leaders fatally damage organizations. Short-term gains, for career promotion and bonuses. It's kind of like, I'm watching our time here. It's kind of like people talk about what would you do to fix the economy? Well, the first thing that was done during the Obama era, when we were in such bad way, one of the first things that his administration did was say to companies, you cannot take the money, the tax break money that we gave you. You cannot take that, which had been done in the previous era under the Bush the Younger, as I call him, under his administration, with all the tax cuts. The Obama administration said to get us out of this national crisis we're in financially, when the heart of the housing market crashed and brought down the entire economy, is when we give you tax cut money, you cannot take that money and purchase your own stock with it. What are you talking about? So what was standard practice during that time, and what led part of this to this crash, is when the government gave a business a tax cut, let's say that's $1 million, they would take that $1 million and buy their own stock, which would inflate the price of stock. And what would that do to executive bonuses? They would get money, but they hadn't increased the company's real value any at all. They had artificially inflated the price of the stock. This was common practice, to the point where companies' stock value were sometimes 1 or 2 or 3 times the actual value of the assets of the company. They did that because how was executive compensation based? Stock price. Our stock price went up this much this year, you get this much in compensation. So the first thing the Obama administration did was say you can't buy your own stock. Before they screamed and yelled, the banks, all those brokers, they screamed and yelled and pitched a fit. But that was, again, that's setting the back of the house afire. Because what happened is that executive compensation got pulled out, and they actually had less value than more value, and their stock prices were inflated, and they didn't have the real value in the company to back up the stock prices. And when business took a downturn, all businesses, many of those people couldn't meet their payroll, and so businesses went out of companies went out of business all across the country, but based on their stock prices were too inflated. And of course, then the president had to step in and prop up many of these companies, most of them financial institutions. But that's what we're talking about in real terms, is shifting resources here for short-term gains, political gains, for financial compensation of executives, while understanding that in the long term that's going to be fatal to the organization. But with the golden parachute or the exit plan that I'll be gone by the time that comes up, I don't have to worry about that. I'll give you an example from a college now. I'll try to hit as many examples as I can from the things that you folks do. Accreditation in college. That's a big thing, especially if you offer licensure programs. You have to keep your accreditation. Financial aid, all those things are dependent upon accreditation. And we had a dean a while back in one of the schools at Gardner Webb, and he refused. I mean, I don't mean covertly, I mean out in public, blowing it out, that he refused to address accreditation standards. For those of you new to the business, forever in colleges, they were accredited by NCATE. We had SACs years ago. What's that? Southern Colleges and Schools. And basically all Sachs did was come in and count the number of books you had and the number of desks. And if they covered the number of kids you had, you were good to go. And then somebody said, well, that's not really a very efficient way to measure this. You know, your method has no validity. Books and desks does not equate with quality education. So they said, okay. So then we had NCATE, which basically looked at your inputs. Do you meet your classes? Do you use the proper materials, those kinds of things? And everybody said, yay, we're doing better now. And then somebody said, well, how do we know it's working? And so, wait, what? Are you assessing outcomes? Do these kids get in graduate school? Do these kids, can they pass the licensing exam? What about their evaluations when they're on the job? How do you know this is working? And they were like, wait a minute. Back to like teaching that math workshop. You want us to actually get results? Wait a minute. We had a dean, very old school at Gardner-Webb, who screamed and yelled that we're not doing that. What do you mean? We're going to change now to CAPE, C-A-E-P, from NCAPE to CAPE. And big part of CAPE is outcomes. All right, you did this. As a result of this, you're saying that it's reliable and it's valid. If it is, it should affect outcomes. Just like if that math workshop is reliable and valid, what should have went up? The math scores. CAPE said if you did what you were supposed to do at this college, your outcomes will be there. Your kids will be able to get jobs. They'll be able to pass licensing exams. They'll be standard or above, or proficient or above in their evaluations once they get on their job. Let's look at those. We had a dean who just screamed and yelled. He would never do that. He would never do that. And continued down that path to the point where the organization understood that we're going to be out of business, because many of our folks who leave Gardner-Webb from now, that then school, now the College of Education, nursing, many of our disciplines had a licensing and performance piece that were then adopted by the people who do the licensing. Said, all right, if we're going to continue to license your folks, elementary teachers, school principals, nurses, have a senior moment. What do we call those people? Physicians assistants, CPAs from the business school, pretty much everything at Gardner-Webb in the graduate and professional side has a licensing exam and has performance standards. And Gardner-Webb finally figured out this dean could scream and yell and pitch a fit, and I'm not going to do this to the end, but that he was burning the house down. That we just ignoring them won't make them go away. That we had to look at our data. What did our performance data look like? Well, we didn't even have a way to get it. We didn't know, didn't care. But now all of a sudden we had to know and had to care. And so the notion that people in charge will always do the right thing is not true. That's what you folks are about. We want you to learn some number theory. We want you to learn some probability. We want you to learn inferential statistics. We want you to learn descriptive, how to describe things, mean, median, and mode, the measures of central tendency. We want you to be able to look at all these things, but from a perspective of doing the right thing for your organization. And like Jamiko says, the right thing to too many people is the right thing for them and not for the organization. You folks are supposed to be organizations, and we're supposed to train you to do that from a moral and ethical perspective. And you say, Dale, you beat us up with this every week. I will beat you up with this every week, because your learning, it depends upon you seeing this through the lens of what's best for your organization. Again, I'm not teaching you all this stuff so that you can cheat and do the right thing for you. You need to be a moral leader, an ethical leader, a servant leader. You need to use this newfound power and knowledge for good and not for evil. That's what I'm most interested in as we go. And so every step of the way, I'm going to remind you of these things. So, well, you're being redundant. I'm going to be redundant. Because everything that we do, we first have to look at what's the long-term impact on our profession and our organization, not just how can I feather my nest as the person in charge, because too many times that's really bad for the organization. As we saw in the financial industry, in 2007, 8, 9, we saw we had people who were only feathering their nests, and we crashed the stock market, we crashed banks, we crashed all these brokerages, did all that. The fallout from that, people, millions of people lost their homes, they lost their jobs, based over people's selfishness. Now, unfortunately, 10 years later, 15 years later, people are again over selfishness over the vaccine. And we have a solution now, folks just won't do it. But again, we have to do the right thing. And people talk about, is it legal to, or moral or ethical to require people to get a vaccine? Folks, we're trying to keep businesses afloat. And the right thing to do is always the right thing to do. So this notion, so the notion is here, you have to put your politics aside and understand what's right for your business. To kind of conclude this segment, David has asked a question. Is there a proper way to figure out sample size? Absolutely. It's called power analysis, and you can Google it. It's just a simple formula. You just put in the size of your population, and it'll tell you what size sample that you'll have to have in order for your results to be significant, not from chance or error. It's 35%. I'll just tell you now, it has to be 35% or above. If you don't have at least a third, then your results won't be significant. There's too big a chance for error, and too much chance involved if you don't have a big enough sample size. And it's a third when you're doing quantitative work. Qualitative work is different now. When we're doing interviews, we have to kind of, it's usually 5% on that. If you're doing interviews, the standard is 5%. If you're doing survey and you're doing quantitative work, it's 35%. You can have more than that, but those are rules of thumb. But again, you can simply Google power analysis and just stick your numbers in, and it'll tell you. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to control for error. Again, it's about our technique. If we don't ask enough people, we can't be sure that what they told us won't be in error when we try to generalize those findings to the larger population. So let's look and see if we've hit everything. Obviously, under this week, I have the notes for what you should have gotten out of chapter 1. I have the PowerPoint if you want to go back over it and review it. That should cover all the different things that we've talked about. All these different things, how to go about doing this. It tells you how to use the book. Here are the notes. This is basically the notes of everything that we should have learned from this chapter. But mostly this chapter is about you being reflective of your practice in your job situation or in your consultancy. How are numbers, how are research, how are these things done where you work? What is important in your field or discipline? What do we want to know? What's kind of the currency? What are the numbers that we talk about? How does it apply to you or your consultancy? And so That's what chapter 1 is about. I have this again on sampling methods. Again, I can't tell you enough that sampling, it's all about, all of research is about population and sampling. Finding the right population, pulling the correct sample. It all starts with that, no matter what we're trying to do. That's where it all comes to. All right, so let me look at the chat right quick. I think I've answered all these questions. Yeah, I think I have answered all the questions. Now, let me stop my share. Look at this. And so we're right on our time. We're 5 minutes early. When we come back, we'll go questions into the break, and then we'll do our case studies. You'll present in groups, and again, we'll present in the order that I had you listed. Again, on course overview. So here are our groups. So group 1 will go first. Alexandra, Candace, Tim, and Kimberly. And so questions that you have for me going into the break about anything that we've covered so far. And oh, by the way, Tim's the star this week. I've been reading Tim's discussion boards. He's really getting out there and working hard on his discussion boards. Thank you, Tim, and very thoughtful. All of you good, but Tim's been especially active on the discussion board this week, and I appreciate that. So, questions that you have for me going into the break. All right, so we'll be back on at 10:30, and we'll start when we come back. Y'all will get to talk today. Won't have to listen to me. So hang in there. Don't go to sleep yet. I'll see you back at 10:30. Thank you. Share your screen. I'll stop my video until usually that helps you. So who's going to share and get us started? There we go.
All right. Okay. Hey, everybody. We are group 1. Group 1 was Alexandra, Candace, Tim, and myself. And we are going to talk to you about measuring effectiveness in a nonprofit. So Tim, take it away.
All right. So just the overview of the case. CAN, Community Action Network, is a network made up of several nonprofits. Please excuse me if I'm looking this way. I have 2 screens. Those nonprofits are the United Way in Austin, Texas, the Austin Foundation in Austin, Texas, and the Homeless Shelter in Austin. And just like many organizations now, they're facing economic crisis that's really causing resources to face scarcity. This is something that I think we all can relate to now. So as a result of them facing this economic crisis, their stakeholders are looking for new ways for them to show the effectiveness of their work. So as they encounter this new problem that's a result of the economic crisis that they're going under, they bring in a consultant who can whose job is to, 1, help them understand how they can measure their effectiveness, but also help them figure out how to show it to the different stakeholders that make up the funding and the partners of the work that they do and can. Now I'm going to pass it over to Alexandria.
Yes, this is just a slide to remind us of the learning objectives for this case study. Being a practitioner for a number of years in the nonprofit world, it brought back a lot of memories and nightmares. But the case was designed to help us understand how this kind of nebulous concept for many organizations, particularly in nonprofit sector, can measure organizational effectiveness. And measurement for a lot of nonprofit sector of that came out in the case. It also serves to point out the tensions between the various stakeholders in the nonprofit sectors, right? There's this idea of organizations existing to produce a particular product at a particular rate or to make money, right? Whereas in nonprofit work, there tends to be more focus on human services, and there are things that you can't necessarily measure well by how much money that you make. And so that tension is really brought out and talked about in this case. And then finally, learning more about the role that communication plays and really how we as humans socially construct meaning, particularly around this concept of organizational effectiveness, meaning that things become meaningful to us because of the negotiation of the various people and stakeholders and practitioners and funders of the work in the nonprofit sector. So I will now turn it over to back to Tim.
All right. So you all see the sentence, and I'm not going to read it off the screen, but as Alexandra said, and I said before, CAN is suffering from an economic downturn that's resulting in them needing a better way to report their effectiveness the effectiveness of their organization's work. They have a range of funders that have both a lens on the public and the private eye. And this has caused a major problem because they need to be able to have this funding to do the work. So they need to be able to satisfy through their reporting of what they're doing, both, well, the whole spectrum of supporters. So yeah, the central problem in this case is that the consultant and CAN need to come up with a collective understanding of organizational effectiveness to report their work in ways that is meaningful and satisfies both the public and private sector. And as we get into this case, we're going to do a good job of explaining more about what that means and what the work looks like. But really, we wanted to lay it out for you that this is what the ultimate problem of this case is, and this is something that's really a lot of organizations are going through right now as a result of really COVID and the economic crisis that the world is facing. But, all right, I'm going to move it, pass it back to Alexandria.
All right, so in terms of the secondary problems, so this environment of kind of the scarcity of resources has almost scared the organizations into having to think more strategically about how they can communicate with funders in a way that helps them to be the choice, right? Or helps them to be able to make the case that they are a good choice or the best choice in terms of limited resources that exist. And so it brings up a really interesting point. We had some discussion in our group about, did that mean that prior to there being an economic downturn and resources being more scarce in the ecosystem, were they not really measuring, right, things like how well they are doing with their mission, or how many folks or how well they're serving folks in this strategic kind of and specific way. And so that comes across, I think, in the case with needing to engage a consultant in order to kind of gain credibility in the sectors, the financial sectors for private and public funders. So in terms of our secondary problems that we highlighted, this notion again of nonprofits tending to be human service focused. It was pointed out in the case study at several points that kind of this shift, both in the frame of mind and in practice, of not just thinking about work in terms of the practice of whatever it is that the different organizations are designed to do within CAN's network, but thinking about their work in a way that can help them to continue to be viable from a financial standpoint. So there has to be kind of these split attentions. And so if you're a practitioner and nonprofit and you know, focusing on the human or focusing on the particular object of your service, it might be a stretch if you have to now think about, well, how can I think about this work in a way that may be palatable to funders, and being able to report out on that is a shift in mindset for practitioners. So talking about the organizations and the organizational practitioners kind of feeling the weight of the shift from just being a service provider to thinking about strategic approaches to your service provision in ways that can help to, again, remain palatable to funders. And so we talked earlier in the learning objectives about this business-like perspective versus a more human-centered or human service approach, but finding a balance or striking a balance between what could typically be called a pragmatic approach for funders, in that they want to see, right, for X number of dollars that we give you, you know, what are we getting for that amount of dollars, right? Or what is the impact of that money, right? Whereas on the other side of the spectrum, it may be, right, I'm not thinking about what the money is doing. I'm thinking about this person who is in a homeless shelter and may have multiple comorbidities, and helping that person to be well and have their basic needs met, right? Which may not necessarily directly correlate to, you know, what is the most efficient use of the funds, right? Because more money might need to be used, and efficiency might not necessarily be the goal. So a secondary problem, again, between the nonprofit ecosystem is being able to strike a balance between how do you, again, demonstrate the impact of a dollar and be mindful of that while also providing the best service for those that exist within your organization. A third secondary problem that we focused on was just really this sense of what does it even mean when we talk about organizational effectiveness, right? And that's, again, by the nonprofit Luke Sorensen, I'm sorry, the consultant Luke Sorensen was essentially set out on a journey to talk to different stakeholders to get a sense of what does this even mean, and how do we come to understand as multiple parts of this ecosystem what how we come to define organizational effectiveness. So you all may remember that conversation ensued with the higher education point of contact in the case study about this notion of organizational effectiveness as a term being a social construction. And what I really took away from that conversation is that something that I call shared meaning, right, must be developed between multiple stakeholders in order for, number one, different people with different perspectives on work to be able to hear perspectives that they may not be privy to in the nature of their work. So again, an example of a funder who may work for a bank, right? If you don't serve in a homeless shelter, right, you don't see the needs, or you don't see you know, the things that are most pertinent in the same way that you would a practitioner. And so being able to have that practitioner, you know, explain to you know, the business person or that funder, and helping them, again, understand their perspective and vice versa is really critically important to the negotiation, if you will, of this concept of organizational effectiveness. So because there's no standard definition currently, everybody is kind of defining it differently. And what we, again, will point out as we move forward is really this need for folks from these multiple perspectives to socially construct a definition that is incorporating these multiple perspectives so that the measurements can then match, right, the types of ways that the input goes into helping each piece part understand what that means. And then finally, the economic downturn, again, is contributing to this lack or the scarcity of resources. And so ultimately it comes down to, right, we have a finite resource, you know, there has to be some ways in which we can really decide who should be cut out, because ultimately that's what's going to come down to. And the really intense need is to decide, are there ways that can better demonstrate than others what the best bang for our buck is going to be as a funder. And so those represent the secondary problems that came up. I will now turn it back over to my esteemed colleague, or turn it not back over, but to my next esteemed colleague who will talk about, oh, is that me? Secondary problems and then the best solution. Oh, I will turn it back over to myself, who will now discuss the best solution. So what we positive is much posited about the best solution. I feel like, is that out of word? Do we do the alternative solutions first?
Yes, we're missing a slide. There we are.
There we go. No, I apologize. So I'm turning it over to Kim, who will discuss our alternative solutions.
Sorry about that. I skipped it.
Oh, that's no problem. All right. I'll make it fast anyways. Thank you, Alexander. That was a great explanation. So the underlying theme in all of those concerns is organizational effectiveness, and how do we measure organizational effectiveness? And so we came up with a number of solutions that the first of those would be to use a SWOT analysis. We all love a good SWOT analysis to determine current and future state and sort of the environment in which you're working. We determined that this would probably be a poor alternative because, you know, there's a SWOT analysis, it focuses on objective standards and not really effectiveness. And so we could make an indirect correlation, and that sort of goes back to this Newton's, cradle example that was in the case study, where we could say there's an indirect correlation between funding and outcomes. So for example, when we're considering United Way, if we focus on the mission of the United Way and determining if the United Way is meeting its mission, we could say, based on the SWOT analysis, that's a lot of money. So surely they're meeting their mission. So if we are able to make that correlation in an indirect way to say a lot of money probably does help us advance the common good, we could make that indirect correlation, but we need additional data points and in order to draw that direct linkage between the funding and the fulfillment of the mission, which is related to organizational effectiveness. So we determined that to be a poor alternative. These next two, quantitative and qualitative, really go hand in hand. And it's similar to the example used in the case. So is it better to have, 200 clients being served, or is it better to make a really transformational change in 12 clients? It's probably a mixture and a little bit of both, right? And so we determined these to be mixed alternatives because it's probably, we're going to get really great data points if we focus on one, but we're going to miss a completely separate hunk of data that we really should be looking at when we're determining organizational effectiveness. So that brings us to our fourth solution, which is a mixture of qualitative and quantitative data. And so, one of the readings that we had that illustrates this point is if you consider, after school care in an organization. And so if you have, a school where you have about 100 students, and let's just say that only 10 of those students required after school care. Well, those 10 students, if you're looking at purely quantitative numbers, that's only, 10% of your population. So is that a great investment for the school? Maybe or maybe not. But if you take into consideration some of the other data points, which is all 10 of those students might be 5-year-olds in kindergarten and they're going home to an empty house. That's a situation where CPS may be involved if you have 5-year-olds going home to an empty house and staying for a long period of time by themselves. And so if you look at it from that perspective, then yes, after school care would be a great investment for the school. And so taking that approach to mixed methodology is going to show you both sides of the coin, and both of those perspectives are important to consider when you're really looking at the effectiveness of an organization. And so again, the mixed methodology, it should show you similar results based on stakeholders, based on different data points. You should come with similar outcomes. And so that would be, a high probability that we would see that. The data would satisfy multiple types of investors. If we're focused on qualitative and quantitative, you can cover that business-like approach by showing, where your money is going to. But you can also show really the impact in the community, which is what and other types of investors may be interested in. And then, there's a very low probability that if you use both of these types of data and use this mixed methodology approach, that it would just focus on one type of metric, like financial metrics. You're going to have more than just the finance piece to build off of. And so there's a very low probability that that would happen. So we determined the mixed methodology approach to be a good alternative in this case. So I will turn it back over to Alexandra.
All right, thank you, Kim. Yes, so as you might imagine from the ranks of our alternative solutions, that the best solution that we came up with would involve creating this comprehensive report that the consultant will help Can to create this comprehensive report to both posit how they are defining organizational effectiveness, and again, doing so in a comprehensive way that, again, includes the feedback, the vantage points, and the issues of importance to the organizations represented in terms of their practitioners, as well as the funding sources, and that shows both qualitative and quantitative measures. And so because CAN as an organization pretty much serves as a clearinghouse for lots of different types of nonprofits, this is a really great opportunity for them to kind of set some standards around, what are general best practices that you want to make sure that you are, you have the infrastructure and you have the organizational capacity to collect in terms of data, and that you continuously do so. And with that being included in the report, also looking at, again, the socially constructed definition of organizational effectiveness is going to be really important because the goal is for it to be more inclusive than just, collecting financial information, or more inclusive than just collecting anecdotal stories of impact. But so that shared meaning, so when funders say organizational effectiveness and when practitioners say organizational effectiveness, they both have a really clear idea of what the other means. Excuse me. And we've thought through, again, this notion of how data can and should tell a story. And so when we're thinking about monetary figures, which are absolutely going to be important, right? You want to think through, for example, at a homeless shelter, right? If someone is donating $25 or $25,000, you want to be able to break that down into, here's how many people can be fed off of this amount of money, right? Or here's how much transitional housing, how much rent we're able to pay for folks who are moving out of the temporary shelter into more stable housing because they're getting employment, because they are having, again, their basic needs met in a way that allows them to experience that transformational change. We also talked about the importance of mission-based work and how organizations really tend to define if they're meeting their mark by what their mission is. And And sometimes that can be a really great measure, and sometimes that cannot be a really great measure. But the difference being, right, that whatever your mission is, sometimes the data is you want things to get more, right? And sometimes it is you want to get less, right? So if you, your organizational mission as a homeless shelter is to, make sure everyone is housed and off of the street, right? Then having more people in your shelter, right, will be a good measure in terms of your mission base, right? If you want to make sure that people, if you're a homeless shelter that want to make sure people are coming out of temporary housing into more permanent housing, and becoming, stable members of society, then having less people over time in your shelter because they're transitioning to more stable housing is going to be an important measure. But again, saying all that to say, really having some benchmarks of what are generally good types of information you want to collect in order to shape your story, excuse me, in a way that is both quantitative and qualitative is going to be really key. And so we talked about the monetary figures, but also having those figures, being able to be accompanied with anecdotal impact stories, or even how the funders may have learned about different ways that they can understand the issues as a result of their engagement with the different organizations. But all of these things will be included in our best solution. So we'll turn it over to Candice for for our implementation.
So here are some of the discussion points that we talked about. So number one was involve multiple stakeholder groups and create a different kind of report to identify those themes. So creating themes provides clarity of like who's at the table and what are their actual contributions to the organization. And it could also bring up a conversation of like who we may need to bring on board as maybe like a new stakeholder, or who we may need to kind of like phase out. And we had a conversation about Lucinda. She's one of the executive members, and I think she was like the only one that it was identified as an executive member of CAN. But possibly bringing on Roderick, it wasn't really clear if he was a part of the organization's board or not, but because he has such a big impact within the community, he would be like a great person to add to the board and possibly help us in, increase funding and the presence into the community. Two is utilizing an explanatory approach of data collection. So having things broken down, in word form and identifying metrics. So some metrics that could be used could be, Tim had brought up like, what are the number of beds do we have overall? How many number of beds are actually being used? Identifying possibly what are some reoccurring gifts that we're receiving? What is the return on fundraising, and maybe like what types of donations are we receiving, and what other options do we need to look towards as far as receiving funding? Those are just some examples. And with using those terms, adding like the numbers and the monetary form back to what Alexandra was saying, like, showing where the money is going to, how the money is being brought in, and is the money being put into good use. And then number three, communicate with the public to show what we're using their money for effectively. And we talked about, increasing the social media presence and using project management tools. So, for example, I know, in higher ed, we do a lot of different surveys, and a lot of people don't like to do the surveys, but in my organization, we do customer satisfaction or customer engagement surveys where we collect information on, how they feel about the services that are being provided, and maybe like what suggestions could we use moving forward to let them know that we're hearing them and that we're utilizing their donations or the money that they're spending, like in fees and stuff like that, effectively. Next slide, please. So for implementation, just some examples. So for increasing the social media and marketing presence, going back to what I was talking about, like having a survey. So whenever we have events, just make sure like we have surveys or provide like opportunities for people to drop their comments. This could be done like in a Google review up under the web search of the organization, so people can drop, testimonial or volunteer experiences, or have the organization has impacted them overall, or a friend or member, family member, etc. And then project management software and training on that software would be great, because even though Luke had to go outside and get a consultant, to gather all of what effectiveness meant for the organization, it would still have been more helpful to have like data. And it's not that, Ken didn't have the data. It's just, how was it being stored? How was it being tracked? And are we keeping up with everything that we're doing? Because everything that we do contributes to our overall effectiveness. And so I think Dr. Lim had brought up about like SACs and stuff like that. And I currently just did a CAS assessment with my organization, and we had to bring everything together, like our student conduct resource management tool, our residential management tool, like how is our programming and how are our conduct issues being resolved against the number of total students that we have in the institution, and is what we're doing on a daily basis effective. And that data is already stored in the system. So what could have been helpful was to pull that information and provide that quantitative and qualitative research into that report, instead of having to piece stuff together last minute.
All right. That's our case study. You have any questions?
Me, I have
Go ahead.
questions. Great job. What happens when you have different funding sources that have opposing agendas?
I can answer that if my group is okay with
Yeah.
that. I feel like this case study mirrors life for me, working in philanthropy and dealing with the Haynes family, which is a family that I think you all may be familiar with when you hear like the last name, who's very, very data heavy. And then another organization that is very they want the language to feel good story about what the work that they support is doing. So what we do is create end of year endowment report, which includes every type of quantitative piece that they may be looking for. So we'll have how much money we raised, the breakdown of what $25,000 to $50,000 gift can do for the organization, and then we'll have feel-good stories from students and professors and children that come into the small to the youth library. But for this organization, when you have two competing, well, I don't want to say competing, but really two competing funders that look at data from different sides, I still think that creating a report and of course we tailor these we tailor them to satisfy who we're sending it to, is still one of the best solutions. Because at the end of the day, you can't not create you need you need all the data, both types, to be able to satisfy the work that's being done, and dollars make the world go round, and to obtain the dollars that's needed. So you have to You have to collect both. But what we can do on what can do on the internal side is tailor the reports to satisfy the particular donor, but then still you utilize and share both. If that makes sense, I hope I answered the question.
Mhm.
Can I add to that?
There's
Tim?
also, who's coming with the assistant?
I just have a very short addition. One of the things that we also talked about in our group, and Candace was instrumental in kind of bringing this to our attention, was really for the when we thought about the alternative solution of an organizational SWOT analysis, is really looking at where are the financial vulnerabilities that they have, that they need multiple layers of address and multiple ways that they can address, because ultimately you're just not gonna have you're not gonna have everything that's gonna satisfy every funder, right? So you need to be able to establish, do we need to add more people on the board, from particular organizations that already align with our mission and with what we are doing to help support or increase the probability or likelihood that you're bringing in sources as often as you need them, and from organizations that are going to be aligned with your structure, with your approach, because again, ultimately you can't please everybody regardless of what you do.
So you're saying get a new whale?
Get several whales, new, old.
Yeah. And that may be, by the way, side note, I love your mixed methodology, explanatory design. That's exactly what you do. Perfect on your methodology there. So to Alexandra's point, you might have to get a new whale or new whales. And I'm going to have I told you about the Museum of the Upstate in Greenville, South Carolina? Have I told you that story? All right, so I had a student who was that partnered with them to do their consultancy, and we had an issue there, a conflict. We had a conflict with the two primary funding sources, and it wasn't that they wanted different information or had different philosophies or different. They were in direct opposition. So here was the problem. So the Museum of the Upstate is in Greenville, South Carolina. It's a really nice museum, and it kind of chronicles the history of the upstate, especially with textiles, obviously. And so their issue became they get half of their money comes from city county government. Greenville County, Spartanburg County, Pickens County. That's the upstate. They get half their money from them. Now they're interested in the number of people walking through the door and turning the turnstiles. All right. And so their event programmer, she went out and got a comic book display and put it in. And so the number of kids and schools coming and that, it turned, the turnstiles and the city county government people, the quantitative people, they were so happy because the usage of this facility that they were paying half the bills on had gone up tremendously. Yay! Unfortunately, they had one prominent family there in Greenville who the matriarch of the family was on the board, the mother, grandmother, and they didn't like that at all. And they were basically, that group was funding half of this. They didn't want them little dirty kids and the great unwashed in their nice clean museum. This place is really upscale. I mean, this is a wine and cheese crowd. And they not only weren't happy about the numbers, they were mad about the numbers. That the city county government said, for us to continue to give you money, we got to see the numbers go up. But the people on the other side said, if you want us to keep giving you money, philanthropic dollars, we can't have all them little dirty kids in there messing up our museum. They're destroying the place. It's like a movie theater. The floor's sticky, it's nasty, it's stinky. These kids are clogging the place up. So the notion here is maybe you have to go out and find different people to be on your board, or more people who have a broader perspective. That's one of your problems is sometimes the actual, what this group wants is in direct conflict with what that group wants. And you're not going to make it. And so sometimes you have to change the group. Now, you're not going to change city county government. You know, that's not the end that you can work on. But, you know, that if they're interested in how many people get served, how many people go through the turnstiles, and they physically have a turnstile that counts the number of people coming in. But on the other hand, you have these philanthropic people who, you know, don't want to see those people come in. And so there again, those are the kinds of things in real life that you get into. Now, a couple other things that I picked up on from your program, and Alexandra and I were on discussion board the last couple of weeks when I talked about the Summer Sea program in Charlotte. Yeah, there are a lot of unintended consequences that are beneficial, but you have to go back to the funding source of what you said that you were going to do to get the grant, or what the grant said that you were going to do in terms of the numbers. You have to go back to that as well. When you come in and when you're trying to, as a consultant, measure the effectiveness of the organization, you have to go back. All right, these people are giving this money for what reason? You got a grant. The first thing you ask, do you have a grant? What are the conditions of your grant? What are the metrics that you have to meet in that grant? When I had a doctoral student who was looking at alternative schools to do a program evaluation, what we did was we traveled around the state of North Carolina to different alternative schools in different counties and said, all right, what did you tell people that you were going to do with this money? And so, and what we found is that everybody had done the same thing, basically. And so when we went back and were devising a program evaluation, that was part of it, is what did you tell the people that gave you money that you were going to do? And then, and we have to always link back to that. It can't just be the people there, what do you think effectiveness is, or what numbers do you think are important? We got to go back to the funding people. What did we tell them that we were going to do? And then that begs the question. We told them we were going to do this. We all agree that this is the metric, but when we went gathered the data, it didn't go well. What are we going to do now? We don't like what the scale said. We're going to get a new scale. We're going to reach down, turn the wheel on the front of that scale. What are we going to do when all the agreed upon metrics of effectiveness, whether they're quantitative or qualitative, when our data comes back bad, what do we do now? And see, that's part of it too, is that your job as a consultant is to tell them what is. And you can give them an action plan. That's when you run to the door before, you don't get involved in the implementation. Because sometimes the news that you deliver as a consultant is not good. All right, here's agreed upon metrics. This is what you said you would do. But unfortunately, this is what you've done. Sometimes you have to be, the bearer of bad news again. That movie from medieval times that I was referencing a couple of weeks ago. But no, I wouldn't kill the master, the bearer of bad news. And he tells this, he tells his first lieutenant, kill him. And that's basically what happens is sometimes the issue is not that we don't have agreed upon metrics. We do, but we didn't meet them. What do you do then? And that's all part of those. We have conflicting conflicting measures of success. What do we do then? We have agreed upon measures of success. We didn't meet them. What do we do then? And that's what you have to solve as a consultant. That's when you have to explain to them. These are the things that you have to do. These are problems that it's not trying to construct meeting. It's trying to work through the conflicts, for the non-performance. And that gets us into cure versus treatment. Sometimes you want numbers to go down. You don't want to have to serve as many people. Our problem this fall in the town of Boiling Springs, where North Carolina, where Gardner Webb is located, is we have 2 elementary schools. And we do, the university has taken upon the Little Bulldog Backpack Program, of which I am a patron. Our problem is we've got 20 new kids to serve this fall. We got to find backpacks and food for weekends to send home with them on Friday for 20 more kids. That's not a good thing. We don't want those numbers to go up. We want those numbers to go down. We want to serve less people and serve fewer people better is what we like to do. So we won't be able to serve our clients nearly as well as we did before, because as you pointed out, resources are finite. And so we can't give them as much, because we know that probably they have siblings at home that they share with, but we won't be able to send as much home because we got to send 20 more little bulldog backpacks home this time. Again, we get into treatment versus cure. Do we really want to solve some of these problems? If we do, we go out of business. Yeah, that's what we want to do, but sometimes we understand that if we're too effective, we put ourselves out of business. Slow down a little bit. Well, that's a good problem to have, but that's part of what organizations do as well. Is don't do too much. You'll put us out of business. We'll work ourselves out of a job. Well, that's a problem that's a good problem to have, but that also factors in. So that's another one of those things that our data should tell us. David, you got a question?
Yes, sir. I think it goes to you and maybe for the group as well, but this question that, and I'm just thinking out loud, is thinking out kind of out loud. This thing of create metrics. And for this particular nonprofit that had never done metrics before, I'm trying to understand, how do they know that the metrics that they create are going to be relevant,
valid, and reliable?
Yes, sir. Reliable at this moment, but maybe 5 years later, when you have KPIs established, key performance indicators. Can you help me understand that, Dr. Lamb?
That's what we're here for. That's exactly what we're doing. You have to become expert in creating valid and reliable metrics. That's the whole notion here. That's what this case study is about, is that you have to use valid and reliable metrics to show effectiveness. You can't just pick stuff out of the air, or you can't just say, well, I think this is important. You have to use validated instruments in a reliable way. That's the whole notion. We have to go back to our research. What has been validated to measure this particular thing? I go back to my watch again. When my wife said, would you like to have a nice watch? I thought she meant a new Timex. I didn't know she meant, tag hour. I'm that's way above my pay grade. But the difference is that this is a certified chronometer. It's been validated to keep time at a certain level. A Timex is not that. It still keeps time, but it's not validated at that level. And so the notion here is every watch is not the same. Every measure is not the same. We have to have validated measures that through research and documentation that have been validated to measure the things those are the things that we do, not anecdotal things that we think might measure. There are 7 types of validity, and these measures have to pass all those tests if we're creating a new one. The best way is use industry accepted, standard validated instruments to do that. I told you back, the validated instrument when I was an elementary principal 31 years ago was the California Achievement Test. Then it became state tests, end of grade, end of course, those things. Validated measures that we all agree measure the things that we won't measure at an acceptable level. Now, on a day-to-day basis, a Timex watch is just fine, but if we're doing something that really requires a lot more precision, we have to use a certified chronometer. That's the definition of a good watch. Now, it costs more than just a watch because it's certified and validated at a certain level. But again, how I use it, the reliability of my watch is only good if I keep it, if I keep a battery in it and it works, and I use it just for time and not to try to determine weight or something else with it. I have to use a validated measure in a reliable way That's acceptable practice in the industry. That's what you have to be knowledgeable of as a consultant. So you got to stay in your own lane, number one. You don't call me in to consult on healthcare. You call me in to consult on K-12. That's what I do. And I'm also very careful when I do a contract to only tie myself to outcomes that I have control over. That's part of what a consultant does as well, is you have to know what you have, the outcomes that you have control over. You know, for example, Davidson, Gaston County, there's a big article, I might have shown it to you last time I was with you, but there's a big article that came out about an initiative between Gardner Webb and Gaston County schools and principal preparation. That would be me, Dave. I wrote that contract. I can pull it up and show you all the drafts all along the way. Now, when I do principal preparation as a subcontractor to the state of North Carolina Department of Public Instruction that licenses these people, I'm held accountable to their performance standards. Can they pass the exam? Can they pass the portfolio? I'm also held accountable the first 5 years that they're on the job for their evaluations that are fed into the state evaluation system. I'm accountable for those performance evaluations. But now the control that I have is I get to pick who we admit into the program. That's the control that I have. If I picked them, I said that, you know, I could train them at a level that they could perform at a competent level, at distinguished or accomplished, you know, proficient on the end. But now this Gaston contract, and I can show it to you, won't take but a second, but I won't. This Gaston contract, I did not write any performance metrics in. Why not? In terms of their performance 5 years down the road. Why didn't I put that in? I don't get to pick. The whole point of the Gaston contract is I take and train 12, now it's 14 as of yesterday. The 14 that they send me, they get to pick. I have to take them, whether they meet our standards or doesn't matter. They get to pick. So I intentionally did not write any performance standards into that contract in terms of what they would be. Now, I did in terms of they will be able to pass the exam and the portfolio, but the performance down the line, I did not put that in intentionally because I don't get to pick them. I know what I can do with them, but now down the line, if they don't meet certain standards, I know that there are certain indicators, there's certain metrics, there's certain validated measures that pretty much tell me whether they're going to be able to do this down the line. And if they don't meet those, even if Gaston picks them, I'm not going to be tied to that outcome because I have no control of that. And so I get to pick that when I wrote this contract with Gaston County Schools. I made sure to say, I can do these things, but if you're picking them, I'm not going to guarantee those things. That's up to you to pick the right people. Now, if they were coming to me just as an applicant, I would look at those validated measures. I'd look at that GRE score, that MAT score. I'd look at that undergraduate. I would look at the undergraduate transcript in core courses and in writing intensive courses. I'd look at that transcript, and I would come down to the notion that, yeah, this person will have the ability once they're in the job to be able to write and show. I can teach them how to show their effectiveness in their job. But if I don't get to pick, now they may pick 12 or 14 that are better than any that I've got, but I have no control over that. I don't know that. So I'm not writing that in the contract as an assessment of this funding model. This is a nonprofit. This is exactly what we're talking about. And so if I get to pick the assessment, I'm not putting something in that I don't have control over. But what happens when you're working with a group that they don't have any control over that? If you're getting money like that museum from city county government, they tell you, you don't have an option as to what they're looking for. They tell you, if you take this money, this is what you've got to produce. And sometimes as consultants, we go out to places that are in a jam because they said, all right, we agree to that, give us the money, but then they didn't do anything to make sure that they collected the data or that they were in that thing. Just like the summer seat program in Charlotte, they didn't do anything to make sure that they were going to meet those funding metrics that they agreed to when they took the money. Grades, attendance, behavior. They weren't doing any of that stuff. But yeah, it's a great program. A lot of unintended consequences. It's wonderful. But that you told them you would do this if they gave you the money. We can't do that. But you took their money. I kept coming back to them. You took their money. Yeah, but we want to show that we're effective. But this is what they want to see, because that's what you told them you would do. But can't you figure us out some other way? No, I can't. You contractually obligated yourself to do these 3 things. Well, I wish we hadn't done that. Well, you know. And so I didn't, just like when I wrote this contract with Gaston, because I had no control over who they're going to bring in, I made sure I wasn't contractually obligated to their performance data once that they get out of the program. I can only control what I can do with them in, because I didn't control who I got. And so I didn't overstate what we'd be able to do because I had no control of it. And see, that's what you're going to face as a consultant. You're going to be paired with companies that overstate what they can do, even though they had no control over that, just in order to get that money. And you have to be the bearer of bad news. You know, we're going to have to measure that, even though you don't want to, or the data's going to be bad. We're going to have to measure it because that's what you said you were going to do. Now, if we have the option to set up the metrics, we make sure that we only set up metrics that we have control of. I had the control of the metrics in the Gaston contract. I didn't put things in there that I had no control of. I'm at least smart enough not to do that. I'm not even the smartest fellow in the conversation at this point, but I'm at least smart enough not to set up things to evaluate the effectiveness of this program based on things I have no control of. Well, that's just dumb. You know, I've done 2 or 3 dumb things already today, but I'm not going to do something that dumb. And so a lot of times as a consultant, you're asked to advise on these kinds of things. If you can't control that, don't do it. Don't manipulate. Don't use an invalid measure or use a validated measure unreliably. Back to David's original question that started this rant. You have to be the expert that finds those things or knows those things or brings in things that we can all accept. You have to know the difference between anecdotal or I've developed this instrument. Was it validated? But well, yeah, it's valid. It measures what I say. There's a process to validate instruments. We'll get to that in one of our later chapters when we get to validity and reliability. There's a process that you would have to, if David sat down and he said, I'm going to figure out an instrument to measure this in city county government in the planning department. It's based on my 25 years of experience in this. Well, that's all well and good, but it's not valid. There's steps that we would have to use to validate that instrument. You're usually better off, especially as a consultant, to use something that's already been validated in your industry. Now, if there isn't one, then you need to create one. But most of the time, there is one. But again, the problem with that a lot of times is we can't meet those we can't meet those standards. If we use that instrument, we won't come out good. But yeah, but we can't change the instrument. If we don't like what the scale says, we can't change and get a different scale or turn the wheel on it. We have to live with what the scale says. And that's the thing about instruments and then I'll have students say, well, this has 6 different things on it. We won't do well on this. And can we drop one of these off? No. If you take questions off or parts of the validated measure off, it's no longer valid. It's an all or nothing. It's pregnant. You either are or aren't. Can't. Occam's razor. Whatever. Fill in metaphor. The blank here with metaphor. We can't cut the baby in half. All of those things. It's all or nothing. Our measure has to be all or nothing, or it's no longer valid. And how we use it has to be reliable. We have to use it the way it was intended to be used. And David's question is the crux of consultancy. You know, it's the crux of this case. We have to use accepted measures in terms of the standard of the profession, but then we have to agree upon them. And sometimes the funding sources don't agree. And to Alexander's point, we have to bring new board members in maybe, or find new patrons. We call them whales in the business. Find new patrons that give us money. You know, and so therein lies our problem. All right, so we'll move on. We'll rotate our case studies, so you know everybody will get more time. But the reason I like to do the same case study is I like to keep us thinking in the same vein. And sometimes we hear things in these case studies that is new or different, but we also like to compare. Is everybody, you know, thinking in the same terms? So let's move to group 2. And this one, you take all the time you need for your presentation, and then we'll break after this group for lunch. So go ahead, group 2.
All right. Good morning. Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Thumbs up. Okay, fantastic. I had the pleasure to work with Marla and Heather on this case study. So we are going to talk to you about measuring organizational effectiveness in the nonprofit sector. So Heather, if you want to go ahead to the next slide. And I'm going to summarize the case for you. And I'm going to start with Luke. Luke reached out to a consultant, and because our case study doesn't tell us if this consultant was male or female, we made the decision, they were college friends, that that we would assume this was a male. So I'll refer to the consultant as a he. So Luke is the director of CAN, which is a collaboration of nonprofit organizations and government agencies. And so Luke sees this need for organizational expertise because of many secondary issues that are going on. They're in an economic downturn. So more people are unemployed, therefore more services are needed, but there are fewer dollars. There's more competition for funders and pressure. Each of these organizations has pressure from funders to demonstrate effectiveness. So Luke reaches out to the consultant and gives him articles, newspaper clippings, journal readings about organizational effectiveness in a nonprofit, and a list of people that he may want to speak to. So our consultant is charged with writing a report that all of the agencies within the CAN network could use. And so he starts out by reading those journals, and many issues come up that effectiveness is a matter of comparison, that it's multidimensional, that it really depends upon the board of directors and their involvement, that it's a social construction, which we'll talk more about later, and the organizational's responsiveness to their needs. So then he says, okay, well, I need to start talking to these people. So he first talks to Dr. Laura Lewis, as you can see, a professor of communications. And she really speaks to that effectiveness is connected to the mission, and that the most important things aren't easy to measure. So communication is key, and being able to tell the story of the organization. And she talks more about the social construction. Then he moves on to talk to the director of the local United Way, Lucinda Beckett. And her conversation really shows him that people realize this can't all be business, but it can't all be the heart of the matter. It has to be both. That we have to be able in the nonprofit world to measure and demonstrate the quality of what we're doing, both quantitatively and qualitatively. So he moves on to Larry Schell, and he's the director of a foundation with a business background. And so, of course, he's saying this has got to be a business model. Nonprofits need to operate more like a business. He's not heartless, though. He says if we run good organizations, we can serve more people. And then he directs our consultant to Roderick Buffkin, the director of the local homeless shelter. And he says, no, we're going to see this differently, But if you're writing a report, you definitely need to include him in your conversations. So our consultant learns from Mr. Buffkin, who runs this homeless shelter, that he's tired of hearing about efficiency and tired of hearing about competition, because he can make his numbers go up by not serving homeless people who have mental illness, because it costs more to serve them. It takes longer to serve them. So if we're all about a business model, we'll just exclude them. But that's not the mission of our organization. That's not the heart of our organization. And he says it boils down to funders have to believe and trust in the organization that they're giving to. So our consultant walks away. And Heather, if you want to go ahead and move to the next slide, knowing that his central problem is that nonprofit organizations, all of these organizations in the CAN network, need an effective and consistent way to measure their organizational effectiveness so that they can combat the economic downturn, the competition for funding, so that they can be healthy and they can sustain their organization through this time.
Okay, so we also listed the learning objectives that were stated on the first page, and we felt these were important as it relates to number one, understanding the complicated issue of measuring organizational effectiveness in nonprofit sectors. As it's stated in the text, and as Melody mentioned, the mission is often or is the heart of what nonprofits do. Yet it is very hard to measure. And so nonprofits are only effective to the extent that they are fulfilling their missions. So we felt this was an important learning objective. Number two, recognizing the tensions in the nonprofit between business-like approaches and holistic approaches. Again, nonprofits want to stay true to their mission and they don't want to become business-like. And sometimes it's a matter of quality versus quantity for them. However, they must still show that they're being financially responsible to their stakeholders. And then lastly, the third one, learning about the role of communication in the social construction of organizational effectiveness. Of course, we've heard and we know that communication is important between nonprofits and its funding sources. They must show that they're being good stewards of their resources and putting them to good use. And the whole concept of social construction, as it alludes to in the text, is that effectiveness is only as real as the people who must do it and make it happen. Heather, you can move on to the, yes.
Cool, thanks. So now we're just gonna pop through the discussion questions that were at the end of the case study. We're gonna give you all some of our solutions, talk through which one we think is the best, and then also offer you all a wonderful example of what we think is a great nonprofit and how they kind of measure their things really well, or their goals, not things, goals. So the first discussion question just asks us to really think about some solutions and decide which ones we think are best. So our 5 solutions are, the first one is to create an effective communication plan. Geez, just like Marla said, they gotta have good communication in order to be successful, and that's just the bottom line. The other recommendation is to develop specific and effective metrics to measure goals. We'll talk more in depth about that in our question 4 answer, really just understanding how we're gonna measure if we meet those goals and expectations based on our mission statement and our vision. The third recommendation is to develop a budget that reflects the organization. So once again, like Marla and Melanie said, are we showing that we are effectively and efficiently using the funds that are donated and given? The fourth recommendation is to develop a story of participant success to create and sustain stakeholder buy-in. Alexandra hit on this a little bit earlier while they were speaking, but really showing people not only are we spending our money well, but we're actually having an impact on these humans and letting them tell their stories about their growth and success. And our last recommendation is to ensure that the board of directors create a clear strategic plan and policy formation. So making sure that not only are the participants and the stakeholders invested in the organization, but also that the board of directors has a clear picture of where they're going and how they're going to create a positive mission and vision for the future. So those are our 5 recommendations. We understand while all of these things may not be effective individually, if you cater all these things together and create a more holistic view, you're going to have a much better plan in place to kind of show how you have the organizational effectiveness. So our second question was talk about social construction. And so when I looked up this definition, just to understand, as I read through more, realized that it's just trying to understand that social construction exists because someone wants it to happen and someone values that thing happening. So when you think about nonprofits, the people who are utilizing these services, as well as the humans who are giving those services, are the way that it's created a social construction. So I like to say nonprofits exist as a social construct because the work they do exists in a space that requires social interaction, and that's going to help humans grow and develop. Nonprofit work tends to be centered around humans becoming better through different food services, providing places to sleep, hot meals, education, all those fun things. So that is really why it's a social contract, because someone believes in it and someone participates in it.
So we felt the important stakeholders for a nonprofit are founders, the employees, the board of directors, the clients, and community members. We feel like that they relate to the organizational effectiveness in the sense that they're putting their resources into the organization and they expect to see a good return on their investment. Nonprofits need to be able to determine metrics that satisfy all stakeholders because as we just discussed, different funders are going to want different things. So you have to determine metrics that satisfy all stakeholders. You must be able to tell their story, or they must be able to tell their story in a way that demonstrates productiveness and success to its donors. And then stakeholders must also see the organization as effective so that people will continue to invest in the organization, which hopefully would create a better sense of community, city, and state.
So we've all talked about this being a challenge. Like, how do we use performance metrics in nonprofit organizations? And so we decided that using a balanced scorecard was a really effective way to do this. And so you see 2 different graphics, which just are 2 different ways to show you what this means. And we all know about the finance side. This is the business side, our budget. What was our proposed versus our actual spending? What are our overhead costs? What are our funding sources? Where are we getting the money? And let's find more people like them. So all that easy to quantify stuff would fit in the finances. But then we've got to also look at that customer perspective and measuring the satisfaction and the retention of our clients, measuring those same things in our volunteers, measuring the retention and the satisfaction of our donors. So taking a look at all of our customers and using those surveys of satisfaction and engagement from them. So that's the customer piece. We also have to look at our internal processes. And this encompasses having that clearly defined mission and strategy that's attractive to donors. It's talking about which of our programs are being effective in meeting the needs of our clients, which ones need to be more developed. Maybe that's donor development, maybe that's communication, maybe that's marketing, maybe it's the services that we're offering. But this encompasses evaluating the overall quality of our processes and then making the necessary changes that we see we need to make. And then the 4th thing on that balanced scorecard is the learning and growth. And this is of our employees. This looks at our human capital that we have and what we have to offer. What's their education? What skills do they have? What skills do they need? What training do they need? It looks at employee turnover. It looks at employee satisfaction. So all of these pieces together represent a balanced scorecard that nonprofits can use to show effectiveness to all their stakeholders.
Awesome. So we really wanted to give a concrete example of what a great nonprofit organization was, and kind of an organization that really does a really awesome job of showing how they have organizational effectiveness on a holistic view. So this wonderful organization is called Safe Harbor. Their mission and vision is really geared towards ensuring that people who experience domestic violence have a safe place to go if they're in need of emergency, as well as giving them services to get out of that situation. So as you see on the screen, their vision is to influence a culture in which people feel safe and valued in their relationships. And their mission speaks to providing services to humans who experience domestic violence as well as their children, to also create a culture where domestic violence is not accepted and where they can educate humans about how to not get into those situations, or if they are in situations, how can they get out of those things. So this organization is located in Greenville, South Carolina, and they provide several services. They provide emergency shelter for adults and children. They also provide counseling for children, family, adult, as well as advocacy counseling. They also provide humans assistance if they want to obtain an order of protection. And they also do some wonderful housing assistance where they can give parents and children assistance on their rent and utility bills for about 12 months on average. They also do really great programming in the community for 4 different counties centered around domestic violence education. It's called Relationship Education Project. It really is geared towards young people to ensure that they just have a clear picture of what safe relationships look like and how they can engage in those. They provide 24/7 services. They have an emergency line where you can call to get immediate assistance. They also have a line that you can utilize if you are deaf or hearing impaired, which I thought was really dope and very inclusive. And lastly, they also provide services that are outside of the shelter. So you're able to utilize those even if you live in the community. You can do that by filling out an intake form on the website. So their website was very, very easy to navigate. Their resources were readily available. And what I really enjoyed as I looked through this organization is that they provide their yearly reports on their website they had 2018, 2019, and 2020. And when you look at the report, they do a great job of telling the stories of the humans who use these services, as well as showing these specific numbers of who they service and show how that money is broken down, how it's spent in like certain percentages. So for example, in 2018, they sheltered 621 humans. In 2019, they sheltered 670 humans. And while in 2020, they sheltered only 389 humans, they definitely showcased that COVID-19 had an impact on those numbers. So while the numbers are fluctuating, they're showing a percentage of 45% of those funds went towards that sheltering. So you understand not only are they helping the student, but the money is kind of aligning with their goals and vision.
Okay, well, when we talked about if we were contributing to this nonprofit, what we would like to see as providing financial support, we would like to see mission or movement towards the mission and the vision. Are they doing what they say they will do? Are they accomplishing the goals that they have outlined? So those would be the things that would be most important to us as someone providing financial support to this organization, movement towards the vision and the mission.
And I just wanted to wrap up with how the balanced scorecard would help us see if they were doing that. If we look at just some of that data that Heather gave us, the number of beds, so we can look at that as a financial piece, like how many people are being served. But that doesn't really speak to, are women feeling more empowered to walk away from abusive situations? So that comes from that customer piece, those interviews that they do with them, those surveys that they do with them. Also, we can look at the number of beds served and the number of shelters. I think they have 3 emergency shelters. We can look at that, but we've also got to look at that learning and growth of our own employees, their employees. Are we working them to death? Are they completely burned out because we're trying to provide that finances, having all these shelters open and all these beds, and our employees can't maintain that? So the balanced scorecard really helps us say, okay, this isn't always more important than this. We've got to look, we've got to find the balance that keeps our organization healthy and keeps our stakeholders engaged in the mission and moving towards that mission. So thank you guys. That concludes our presentation. If you have any questions for us, we would be delighted to answer them. Alexandra.
Oh, that was my clapping of the hands.
Oh, I'm sorry. That was a hand raise.
I love you all's design. This is amazing. It was really engaging as I listened to what you were saying, to be able to visualize some of the things you were saying. So great job.
Okay, if you will unshare, we will, I'll do a quick debrief. 3 main points from this presentation. Again, I love this one as well. Social constructivism and the role that communication plays in that. That's the qualitative piece. Qualitative, remember, is about how we make sense of the world. It colors the world. The quantitative is kind of a framework. It's kind of the no nonsense. It's the black and white. It's the numbers. But the richness comes from the social constructivism of the qualitative part of how we make sense of the world. And so that's an important piece in nonprofits, especially in the role where you're trying to do philanthropic things. That's a very important piece. So we can't forget that. We can't just do the quantitative. We have to do the qualitative. But the qualitative, a key part in that is this group pointed out, group 2, thank you, is communication. That's really the key here in that qualitative is the communication. It's not numbers, it's words. That's the first takeaway. Second takeaway is mission vision. Unfortunately, our vision is our own. What we want to do is our own as an organization. But unfortunately, the mission is how we do it, and that involves stakeholders. We can't fulfill our vision. I mean, we can have our vision, but we can't fulfill it through our mission, is how we do it. If we don't, if that's determined by the client system. If they're not participating, if they're not funding, if they're not coming, if we don't have anybody, that's the ways and means by which we do that. So we can set as an organization and come up with our own vision. But when we start talking about how we're going to do it, we have to collaborate and involve all the stakeholders. That's where most organizations fall short. They think that everybody will just automatically see the efficacy or how wonderful that they are. And that everybody agrees that we ought to be doing these things. No, they don't. Again, that communication thread runs through that. We've got to bring all of our stakeholders together when we start talking about how we're going to fulfill this vision through our mission. And then the third thing is, and this is a question, when you use a balanced scorecard and you've got all these different parts, you've got it all organizationally plotted out. The question, and this is kind of a personal thing with me, do all stakeholders need to be involved in every part of that balanced scorecard? That's a question for anybody in the group or anybody in the class. Do all stakeholders need to be involved with all parts? We need that balanced scorecard. That tells us all the players and everything we're going to attempt to do. But do we risk burnout if everybody's got to be involved in every part of that balanced scorecard? Go.
I think you definitely risk burnout, and I would say, they don't all have to be involved in every piece of that scorecard, as long as you are communicating every part of that scorecard to every person. So you can create a piece that you're not necessarily involved in, but if you're aware of it, you have a more clear picture of what's happening.
You have to compartmentalize. You know, I hate the term, but it's kind of like, you have to have people. It's okay if they just stay in their lane. Everybody that you have that's a stakeholder doesn't have to be involved in every part. You risk burnout and overload if you do that. I'll give you an example. This nappy beard that you see me growing, I started on my birthday on July 14th. I do this every year. Yesterday, I booked the event, Santa Claus event on December 10th that benefits the Women and Children's Shelter in Statesville, North Carolina, which is just north of us. Now, my only part is to be Santa Claus and collect toys for the children in that shelter. Now, I agree with what they're trying to do, but I can't be involved in any. I will play along, but now I'm going to be interested in my part. I've got my suit, I've got my books, I've got the boxes to collect the toys. I have the way to get the toys there. But that I'm a stakeholder, but I can only do my part. I don't want to be involved in anything else. I've got other things, other things that I'm involved in different things. The wonderful part about being my age is I've given up a lot of things in my life, and I do the things I want to do, and a lot of those are philanthropic things. But I can't be involved in all the different aspects of that shelter. I'm only interested in collecting toys for those children. That's my piece at that one. I told you I'm a patron and global. Some other things I have different roles in those. I get, I'm just using me as the bad example here. But I can't be, I don't need to want to be involved in meals and beds and bedding and paying the power bill. I'm just interested in collecting toys for you, for those children, so they have some Christmas at Christmas time. That's what I'm interested in. And so you have to compartmentalize this for me. I set up the date, the event. I do my piece. I'll get you the toys. Got the event. The place to do the event, the clubhouse, the facility, all that stuff. I'll do my part on that. But I don't need to be or want to be. Don't have time to be involved in all those things. So that's one of the things that in these organizations, and especially you as a consultant, you've got to remember. You want a balanced scorecard. You want to make sure that you can see all the different components. But every stakeholder doesn't need to be involved in every piece of it. If you do, you risk burnout, and then you don't have anybody to do that. So you have to kind of compartmentalize it. And I like your graphic that shows that compartmentalization of that. That's very important. Everybody doesn't have to be involved in everything. That's a big part of managing nonprofits and leading nonprofits and being a consultant too. All right, who are the people we need to work with this piece? And you have to help define that for them. They just think everybody ought to get together in a room and everybody does everything. No, that won't last long. I don't have time to go to meetings in Statesville. I'm interested in what you're doing, but I don't want to be involved in trying to get meals. I'm the toy man. I'm Santa Claus. I'm going to get you some toys. I'm interested in your bigger mission, absolutely, in your bigger vision. To get women out of domestic violence situations and children, absolutely. I'm with you 100%, but I can't be involved in cots and bunks and beds, and pillows, blankets and meals, and I can't do that. Don't have time for that. I can do what I can do for my piece, and I'm just using me as a bad example again. There are other people that do a whole lot more and a lot better people than I am, but again, we've got to be able to utilize the individual talents and things, the pieces that people can do. We can't just say, well, if they can't do everything, we don't want them. If we can compartmentalize it in our balanced scorecard and we can see the bigger picture, how we can plug people in at different levels, we don't risk burnout, and we can utilize people for the talents or the gifts that they want to give us. That's very important. when you as a consultant are setting up this balanced scorecard, that you help the organization to understand that these people, we plug them in here, but we don't need them everywhere. We just plug them in where we need them. And effective use of our human and fiscal resources. That's a big part of these plans that you do as a consultant. And thank you for bringing that part of this out. That shows how that works with the balanced scorecard. Excellent. We're right on our time. It's 12 o'clock. We'll take a 30-minute break. We'll be back at 12:30. That'll give us just enough time for our last presentation. And then we'll be done for the day. I'll see you in 30 minutes. Thank you.
Good afternoon, cohort and Dr. Lamb. The group that we have includes Jamiko, Mackenzie, and Blair, and myself. And we'll be looking at measuring organizational effectiveness in the nonprofit sector, case of the Community Action Network. So I'll start out by giving the learning objectives from the case. And I won't belabor this too much because we've already pretty much talked about it, but I'll give a sum up from our perspective, trying to understand the complicated issues of organizational effectiveness in nonprofits. If you think about it, if you think about civil engineering and mechanical engineering, that's an exact science typically. And we know that nonprofits are not engineering, electrical, civil, and mechanical. And in fact, that many nonprofits and some organizations in general, especially helping professions, are can be inherently inefficient because their whole role tends to be trying to provide a social type services. So it may not necessarily be as efficient as we would like to be, but we'll still delve in that some of the information we provide today. Second bullet talks about just recognizing those tensions between the different nonprofits. Everyone's competing for this limited resource. And what we do know is that there's agendas like Dr. Lamb spoke about earlier in terms of, what is your organization trying to do and trying to accomplish. There's also such a thing called politics that plays a role in the process as well. And then that last bullet talks about this idea of social construction of the organization, how organizations form. Unlike engineering, where there's the base formulas of engineering that you learn, whether you interact with anyone or not, this formula in terms of engineering, electrical, where this pipe is going to go, that one engineer can do that, unlike a nonprofit, which may involve a number of people. So we'll move on to the next slide. In the background, and the last group so keenly addressed in our summer as well about CAM, based out of Austin, Texas. And the challenge, obviously, we was stated earlier, is the fact that there's a downturn in the economy. So inherently in local government and inherently in nonprofits, there's not a lot of money to go around. And so there's already limited resources. And when you exacerbate the situation with a downturn in the economy, it only makes things worse. And so the key players that was mentioned earlier, and I'm thinking, I was not sure, the organizational consultant, much like the last group, I'm not sure if it's Matt Coachman, and we can make that assumption, but we were not sure either. But the other person is Luke Sorson, who is the director of the Community Action Network, CAN. I did, we talked about bias earlier. We did have some concern, at least in examining when you're hiring an organizational consultant, where he said that he and a college friend, well, there's nothing wrong with that, but you got to be extremely careful in terms of making sure that you're establishing credibility. Because if it appears that you're hiring someone that could be a limitation. So I'm not saying that's necessarily an issue, but that's something that we recognize. So you have Dr. Laura Lewis, Professor of Communications at the University of Texas, Lucinda Beckett, is the director of United Way, was already mentioned, Larry Shell's. Interesting take Larry Shell has. I listened to the previous presentation, and they covered it to the T, spot on. But that is, to me, going back to that tension that Larry Shell had with some of the nonprofits moving to a more business perspective. And he's the director of Austin Foundation. So we know that he was more focused on more of efficiency and more to make sure that things would run like a business model. Whereas Roderick Buffkin would not have any of it. I think he understands the importance of quantitative data, but he had concerns about just counting widgets and number crunching, as opposed to really understanding what they do. As I mentioned earlier, some nonprofits are just inherently inefficient. I wouldn't say it's inefficient, but their goal is to help someone, and sometimes it may require additional services. And I can tell you, working in local government, that's the question that we always have, dealing with what's in the public interest and what is in the public good, much like nonprofits. And sometimes, whereas the private sector is the bottom line, in the nonprofit arena, is the bottom line is that's not the bottom line, although it takes funds and resources to fund the organization. So we'll move on to the next slide, Blair. Thanks. And part of the case study had 5 discussion questions, and we don't include the questions. And basically, I'll sum up the 5 questions. I won't read those items on the screen, no, all that data on the screen and insult your intelligence, but there were questions around recommendations that we'll have more clarity later on with our presentation. But the first one dealt with, making recommendations. And, we talked about, having a task force that, that included board of directors, staff, and volunteers to develop a baseline, basically that they could agree on in terms of what kind of objective criteria could be used for establishing what is organizational effectiveness for the organization. Again, taking a mission into consideration. What is your purpose? What is it that you are desiring to do? And what are you telling people that you're going to do? And that's where this idea and this concept of social construction comes in. You have everyone at the table, and just like the last discussion we had, everybody can't be everything to everything. However, with social construction, you don't always know what you don't know, and that's why it's always prudent to have as many people at the table as within the organization, those key players, those key stakeholders, to have that conversation, because we all have different backgrounds. And part of the nonprofit, obviously, is that social component, establishing social construction. Again, this is not electrical engineering. And so there's no formula, no size fits all when it comes to qualitative type data and qualitative work. When you're talking about quantifiable data, you may have one unifying standard. I think the case study said there's no universal set of principles for nonprofit establishing what that is. We also talked about, and we'll get a little bit more into this, developing a regression analysis to see if we can glean any kind of historical information that could help us in the future, to be specific, whether it's quantitative, to look at, how much money have we received? Where's that money come from? We know that the dynamics of philanthropic organizations are changing, and the history of organizations and donor organizations and funding organizations, they always had, like Dr. Lamb talks about, big whales, and not a lot of little whales in some organizations. And so really doing a regression analysis to look back if there's any history that we can glean to help propel us for the future, with demographics changing, with additional social media, and the different generations, Generation X and Generation Y, being a little different than what the traditionalists used to do in terms of just giving. Whereas the new generation is like, I want to know where my money is going, and I want to know, is it been effective? And also examine short and long-term approaches to organizational effectiveness, try to establish some continuity over time. We also talked about developing a strategic plan that really incorporates this idea of organizational effectiveness, this social construction within the strategic plan, such that we are intentional about talking about what is that we're trying to do, from a quantitative way and a qualitative way. Sometimes when it comes to nonprofits, people see it, or they just do good work, United Way, or whatever the case may be. This homelessness nonprofit, that's what they did do. But when money is limited, people are getting smarter about these type of things. They're going to want to know. The important stakeholders that we saw, some was already mentioned. I won't mention all of them because they are previously mentioned, but I would add that we thought also local, state, and federal government were important stakeholders because there's a lot of grant money out there, also state grant money. We also felt the community, and that, was important. Residents, served and unserved, and private industry plays a major role. And then the donors and also the nonprofits. I skipped up, should have went number 2, organizational effectiveness, but I won't delve into that too much because I think that we're all going to be similar in terms of including this idea of social construction and also this idea of communication and within organizational effectiveness to determine what is important in reality when it comes to effective organization. We'll talk a lot about this idea of relevancy when it comes to nonprofit and how do you maintain sustainability? It's through being relevant for today, not 2 years ago, not 3 years ago. And we think by including organizational effectiveness in the strategic plan, we feel that that's always going to stay in the forefront in keeping organization relevant. Next slide. And on these two, the last one, 4 and 5, talks about nonprofits, and you hear more about that from Jamiko and also from Blair. But we did include this idea relating the question. This idea you have to have both qualitative and quantitative methods to be effective. I use the example that Roderick Buffkin talked about in this idea of homelessness and sending mental health clients to the state. And he said, and he said that just like I was stated previously by the previous group, that you can send the clients to the state, but the question is that the right thing to do? Are you transferring the issue? Mental health clients, they just move from one place to the next. But are you really, curing, or are you really mitigating the issue? And so we can, he was not necessarily opposed to metrics, but he did have a concern about, he thought, Roderick Buffkin thought that when you start talking about inefficiency, you're talking about creating metrics. He said, you're talking about efficiency now. And when you're talking about efficiency, you're talking about where money's, who gets the money, who doesn't. And then there becomes this idea of agendas and what interests can you serve. So now, and it's a good segue into the organization that I served as chair of the board of United Way in Gaston County, as far as, and I also was a donor through my job, and I often wonder how was it the United Way was the only organization I knew that you had direct payment to a nonprofit, and that was something that had been done a while. That Gaston County allowed United Way to actually have employees, and also even in the private sector in Gaston County. But serving as a chair around, and this is critical, is right at the time where in 2008 we had a downturn economy, and then we were trying to build back up. And in around 2009, 10, 11, and 12, the United Way began to change its philosophy of just giving money to these agencies. They did then change their process to what they call was community impact. So agencies would have to prove their worth, meaning that they would have to show how they were being effective, and they'd have to show metrics and measures. And we have to go through this entire whole process of helping these agencies who we actually, the donor agencies, those agencies been the agencies that we gave money to. And but the key issue here, and I'll sum that up, was that we wanted to make sure that we were providing quality and effective services while we remain relevant to the community in which we serve. We didn't want to, we could not, as United Way, simply be seen as number crunchers. somebody just giving money and we're counting number of staff members. How many people are we serving? That's fine and good. But we also need to be seeing that we're actually doing a quality work to the community. And we could judge that by the amount of time that this organization had been in existence for Gaston County. So at this time, I turn it over to my colleague, Tamiko. I think it's Tamiko, right?
Yes. So what we talked about, and I think we kind of on the same track all day, but really the central problem is there's a lack of synergy or understanding of what organizational effectiveness means for this organization and their partners and the people that they work with. There's not a clearly developed criteria of what it means to be effective within the organization. We know that having a common language and developing a common core of understanding of this is what it means, this is what a highly performing organization is, this is what a not highly performing organization does or is, helps in everyone knowing when we're doing good work or where we need to improve in. So we saw that as a central problem in this case study. So some secondary problems that we saw was not knowing how to engage with stakeholders effectively. From the interviews that the consultant did, it seemed that everyone had a different understanding of what the purpose was and how do we move forward and what was the problem. So not being able to engage with stakeholders effectively contributed to that. There also was a lack of funding sources. So there being this shortness of funding and also connecting that to staying relevant, like remembering what we're doing and what our mission is and making sure that we're mission critical and we're doing what we can do what we do the best and not just doing a bunch of things to broaden our scope, but really being like focusing in on the scope and being specific on what we're doing and like maximizing those resources and the actions related to that. Communication, we talked about that. There's the lack of agreement and then also being mission focused, like we just said. So I got some screenshots from the article itself. I was like, what evidence? The evidence is all there. Through the case study, reading through the activities where the consultant was talking to different stakeholders. There was a number of times where the consultant and the stakeholders seemed to be at an impasse about like what needed to be done and why it needed to be done and what was the focus. There seemed to be a lot of issues around like that socially constructed idea of what the problem is, because everyone in the organization only saw it from their point of view and not thinking about it as a collective or as a whole. So those are some of the things that we noticed that helped us get to arrive at the position that what we got at about what the central problem is. Blair?
Some of the alternative solutions that we decided upon were to develop a criteria that would directly align with the organization's mission and vision around organizational effectiveness through a task force that would present the criteria for approval from the board. The next alternative solution would be to complete a regression analysis. This would help the organization identify what the organization has done in similar times of challenge. The next alternative solution would be to allow the board to develop a criteria solely based on their experiences, negating the any input from other team members in the organization. We collectively decided that this would probably be the least effective solution, considering the fact that the idea of organizational effectiveness is already has a skewed understanding amongst the organization. And then the last alternative solution would be to study the organization's sustainability, thinking about what is the organization doing well, what is keeping them relevant in this economic state where people are really digging in and making conscious decisions about where they're donating to and where their funds are going to be supporting which organizations. The recommended solution that we chose would be develop a regression analysis and complete a qualitative and quantitative study on the impacts of the organization and how it relates to its mission, vision, and values. By using this solution, we will be integrating the regression analysis, which would be a comparing and examining the relationship between two or more variables of interest, which would be aligning with funding and their organizational effectiveness, as well as creating the task force to create a universal criteria of what organizational effectiveness means to this particular nonprofit. The plan for implementation would be to first develop that task force to help guide the study and analysis. This task force would be comprised of individuals from every level of the organization, making this would help to ensure that the universal criteria of organizational effectiveness is explicitly stated and understood by all members of the organization. This aligns with that social construct that we were talking about throughout the case study. The importance of what organizational effectiveness is to your organization directly aligns with what everyone agrees upon that it is. The next plan is to develop an organizational effectiveness plan. This is where we will be incorporating both qualitative and quantitative data. Throughout the case study, the people that were interviewed, they had their individual preferences on which piece of data was more important, but it was evident that when you combine both that mixed methodology, you get an entire picture of what the organization is doing and what the organization is capable of doing. And then lastly, we will be ensuring that they are reviewing and ensuring that the mission is aligned to what they are actually doing. This would ensure that they are staying on top of their mission and vision and just greater accountability in what they're saying they're going to be doing, making sure that they are being responsible with the funds that they are receiving and using them how they say they are actually using them. So that is our presentation.
Excellent. Yay. I'm gonna have to up my game. Y'all are better students than I am instructor. I'm gonna have to do better. So I'll work on that for next time. Some thoughts from this one. Excellent. Some things that pointed out. David had a great point that most nonprofits are not as efficient as profits. And so one of the things that we have to, when we're collecting data, we have to resist the notion to put our thumb on the scale or collect the data that we talked about, or use metrics, that kind of thing. You just have to find what's there and then get people to understand the very nature of what we're doing. Our data is not going to be as good as if we were a profit organization. That you can't hold us to that same standard. That's a great point, David. But see, that's the very crux of why people put their thumb on the scale, or use an invalidated measure, or use a validated measure unreliably. Because when they collect the data and they see it, it doesn't look like what they think it ought to, or it's not as good as they think it should be, or they're comparing it to profitable organizations and they're falling short. Oh, I got to fix this. We have to. As ethical people, and leaders, we have to resist that urge to thump the data. We call it in the business. We call it thump the data, understanding that we don't have to show the efficacy that the profits do, because we're not in that world. What we're doing won't show that as we won't be as efficient by the nature of what we're doing. We're not going to be as efficient. And we have to be careful in our board makeup if we have any control of that as leaders or as consultants. If we recommend, we have to be careful in our board makeup that everybody on the board can't just be a hard charging business person, because then we lose that perspective of what success is, because we want to hold them to the same standards. Now, also in that line, here in the town that I live in, Lake Norman, is Cornelius. On this side of the interstate is the Goodwill, and on the other side is the Habitat for Humanity, the Restore. Now, we have to also understand that Goodwill Industries is not a nonprofit, it's a for-profit. And one of the things that we have to be careful of here in our town is that the for-profit places sometimes compete with the nonprofits and vice versa. And we have to be careful that we don't let business people dominate the boards of our nonprofits, because they are looking out for themselves and their interests. And so we have to be really careful here. The folks in the Goodwill here have been really good about it, but that hadn't always been the case. You know, they both depend on people bringing and donating goods. That's their business. And you know, the profit people don't seem to understand that ethics is just a word in the book to them. When they're profit driven, they don't play fair, and you have to be cognizant of that. You have to be careful. But on the other end, nonprofits have to be careful not to do things that harm profits. You know, for example, schools, some of their vocational departments, rules had to be written. You can't be fixing cars. You can't be painting cars. You can't be doing cosmetology. You can't be building these sheds and selling them on the market, and Mays Manufacturing down the street can't compete with your prices because you got free labor and a lot of your stuff's been donated. So it cuts both ways. You have to be careful on that. A lot of that has to do with the makeup of your board. And then the last point that I want to make, I love your analysis. You know, analysis of variance. ANOVA feeds your linear regression. I love that you do a regression. I think that's a really good idea. But my last point is this, and I'm the world's worst, and so I'll beat myself with this stick. This notion of I know a guy. Let me bring my friends in. Let me get everybody on the payroll, or let me bring in my buddy. I'm the guy that everybody knows. When somebody wants something, they all come because I am that guy. Last week they needed people to supervise English student teachers, so they called me. Yeah, I know a guy. I know a guy and two gals, and I can help you out. But they were former English teachers, and they are current school administrators who evaluate teachers for a living. They have credibility in that realm. So you got to be careful, and that's a great point about credibility. You can't do that I know a guy thing. And the problem for those of you who are old enough to remember when United Way in Mecklenburg County blew up several years back, the executive director was pulling $1 million salary, not only for herself, but she hired every relative and friend she knew. She knew a guy and gals. And so their compensation was ridiculously, it was like 1,000 times higher than the average United Way on compensation, because she was pulling $1 million plus. Her travel budget was $1 million, and she employed every friend and relative that she had. You got to be careful on that I know a guy. And especially when you're doing evaluative work, you got to bring in people who have credibility, who have standing in that field, who are recognized experts in that field. You can't just bring in I know a guy. And that's what you people are trying to become, that expert in that field, rather than just you are that guy or gal that somebody, your friend hired you. You've got to bring some credibility to what you do. All right, so to finish up for today, let me share my screen. Let's look at next time. Let me go back to that, pull up that document. All right, so today was September the 11th. We got to everything. The Salkine, you folks just need to look at Excel if you need me to go over any of that with you. Again, you schedule a meeting with me. Remember, we're not going to meet again until Saturday, October the 2nd. You see this extra week between classes? Melody's already scheduled a session with me to do Qualtrics, and/or I can do Excel at that time. It's more of an individual thing. So please remember that if you're ready to start looking at data in your consultancy, you need to be able to start doing surveys or analyze spreadsheets or any of that. That's what this extra week is for. So either on the 18th or the 25th, you can schedule a time with me between 9 and 1, our regular class time, and I will work with you individually if you're ready to start collecting data or you're ready to start learning about that in terms of using Qualtrics to do that. Now, Qualtrics will do Qualtrics will do the data analytics as well. So if you don't, our book uses Excel because it's not the latest. We use now Qualtrics. But if you want to do some spreadsheet work, I can work with you. But trust me, we can do all the analytics you want to do through Qualtrics. And so if you need to, if you're not ready, don't schedule a time if you're not ready yet. If you're not there, this is for those of you, if you're thinking about collecting data or you're near where you want to start collecting data, then schedule a time. And now, if you're already proficient with Qualtrics, I won't waste your time. But I can do surveys really quickly. I can teach you how to do them. We can do the analytics once we've got them. Schedule a time with me. As I said, Melody and I are on for 11 a.m. on Saturday the 18th. And so other than that time, that hour block, hopefully won't be so long-winded, it'll be a whole hour, but schedule one. You got several windows there for those 2 Saturdays to schedule time. The next time we get together, we'll be doing the next case study, of course, which is, get my screen to share here, which is 16A, and we'll talk about Salkine 2 through 6 in the morning, and then hopefully we'll get through about the 12th chapter of that. Again, you see, keep up with your activities over here on the right side. Make sure that you write that you do your reflection on the case study from today. Again, I don't want War and Peace. Half page is more than enough. Reflect on the process, what you learned, working with others, any of that. Again, these tests in the teal color are optional. The others aren't. Make sure you're keeping up with your discussion boards. Make sure you're keeping up with your activities. If you need a session on Qualtrics or if you'd like to know a little more about Excel, schedule a time with me over the next 2 weekends. And if not, I will see you folks again on Saturday, October the 2nd. It'll be the same process as today. We'll go from 9 to 1 and we'll try to stay on our time. All right, anybody have anything for the good of the group before we go?
Well, Mountaineers.
All right, go Pack. So thank you all for your time and attendance today. Again, I'll strive to be a better instructor. As students, your work today was exemplary, and I applaud you for that. Have a good weekend. I'll see you next time. Thank you.